What are you doing here? You have no business in this meeting.
Since the day I married you. You signed the divorce papers 3 days ago. Today, I sign mine.
The front door closed at 5:47 in the morning. Celeste heard it from the bedroom. Soft, deliberate, the specific sound of a man who did not want to be heard leaving. She lay still for a moment. She counted the seconds. She had been doing that for months without knowing she was doing it. Counting the seconds between the sound of him and the silence that followed, she got up at 6:15. She moved through the morning the way she always moved. Careful, measured, one foot and then the other. She was 7 months pregnant, and her body had its own opinions about every movement she made, and she had learned to negotiate with it the way you negotiate with something that holds all the power. The bathroom, the mirror. She looked at herself for 3 full seconds, which was her limit on hard mornings. Then she turned away. She put on the robe her mother had given her the Christmas before the pregnancy, the one that was soft enough to mean something. She moved down the hallway, past the library where she read every night, past the nursery door she kept halfway open, because she liked to see the light from the east-facing window lying across the floor. The kitchen smelled like the prenatal vitamins she had forgotten to take the night before. That iron and calcium smell. It had become the smell of this pregnancy, the smell of the last 7 months of her life. She put the kettle on. She reached for the vitamin bottle. That was when she saw it. A manila envelope, sitting on the kitchen island, next to her vitamins, next to the small framed photo of Sterling at his sophomore homecoming that she kept there because it made her smile every morning. Next to the wooden bowl that had been her grandmother's, the one she used for fruit and sometimes left empty because it was beautiful. The return address was a law firm, Hargrove and Associates. She did not recognize the name. She picked it up. She turned it over. Her name was typed on the outside, not her full name, not Celeste Simms Okafor, which was how she signed everything. The hyphen, a small private insistence on not disappearing entirely into his name. Just Celeste Okafor. She opened it. She read the first paragraph twice. Then she set the papers down on the counter, very carefully. The way you set something down when your hands have gone cold and you are not entirely sure they will hold, Lord. She stood in the kitchen of the house on Magnolia Ridge Drive, the house with 6 bedrooms and the chef's kitchen she had designed herself, and the library on the 2nd floor, where she had read every night for 11 years. She stood there and she breathed. The papers were thick. Official. Her name at the top. His name below it. 14 years of marriage reduced to a document. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Filed by Marcus Darius Okafor. 3 days ago. 3 days ago, she had been standing beside him at the Okafor Foundation gala. In the green dress she had bought specifically because it could accommodate 7 months of pregnancy and still look like something worth wearing. She had stood beside him and smiled while the Birmingham Business Journal photographer told them to move a little closer. Marcus had put his arm around her. The flash had gone off. She had thought, we look good. We still look good. 3 days ago, she picked up her phone. She did not call a lawyer. She did not call her mother. She called her sister. Vivian answered on the 2nd ring. It was 6:52 in the morning. Vivian was always up early. Years of opening her salon at 7 had made her an early riser, and she had never quite recovered from the habit. Hey, Celeste said. That was all she said. One word. There was a pause. A short one. Vivian had known her sister for 34 years, and she could hear everything in that one word. I'm on my way, Vivian said. Celeste set the phone down on the counter. She looked at the papers again. She looked at the name of the law firm. Hargrove and Associates. She looked at the date it was filed. She looked at the grounds listed. Irreconcilable differences. She pressed one hand flat against her belly. The baby moved, a slow roll like a question being turned over. I know, Celeste said, I know. She picked her coffee mug up, decaf which she had not forgiven her doctor for requiring. She went to the window. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up, a dog being walked, a car backing out of a driveway, the Henderson sprinklers starting their morning run. Everything looked exactly the same as it had looked yesterday morning. Everything looked completely normal. She was 7 months pregnant with his child. She had not missed a single prenatal appointment. She had read every book. She had set up the nursery in the smallest guest room, the one with the east-facing window that got the best morning light, because she had read that morning light was good for babies, and she had believed it, carefully, with research, with both hands. He had not been home last night. She had told herself he was at a business dinner. He had business dinners 3 or 4 nights a week. She had stopped going to them somewhere around month 5, when standing in heels for 3 hours had become genuinely unreasonable. He had not pressed her to come. She had thought that was consideration. She understood now that it was convenience. She heard the front door open. Vivian had a key. She had always had a key, because Celeste had learned early in this marriage that she needed at least one person who could walk in at any hour. Vivian came into the kitchen. She was wearing her good coat over her pajamas, which meant she had come straight from her house without stopping to change, which meant she had heard everything in that one word and had not wasted a single minute. She looked at Celeste. She looked at the papers on the counter. She picked them up and read the first page. She set them back down. "Where is he?" Vivian said. It was not a question. "I don't know," Celeste said. "He wasn't here when I woke up." Vivian looked at her sister, at the 7-month belly, at the cold coffee, at the prenatal vitamins that had not been opened. She looked at Celeste's face, which was very still and very careful, the way it got when Celeste was working through something enormous and had not yet decided what to do with it. "Sit down," Vivian said. "Let me make you some real breakfast. I'm not hungry." "Sit down anyway." Celeste sat. She watched her sister move through the kitchen with the ease of someone who had been in it 1,000 times. Sunday dinners, Christmas preparations, the morning after Sterling was born, when Vivian had appeared at 7 a.m. with a full grocery bag and had cooked for 3 days straight without being asked. The kitchen filled with the sound of eggs cracking, the smell of butter hitting a warm pan, something ordinary, something that meant the world had not fully stopped, even though it felt like it had. Celeste said. Vivian said. "He filed 3 days ago." "I know. The gala was 3 days ago." Vivian turned around from the stove. She looked at her sister. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The butter sizzled. Outside, the Henderson sprinklers finished their cycle and clicked off. "He stood next to me," Celeste said. "For 2 hours, he put his arm around me." He smiled at that photographer. "I know," Vivian said. "And he had already filed." Vivian turned back to the stove. When she spoke, her voice was controlled in the way of someone who has been holding something for a long time and is choosing still not to drop it here. "I have been biting my tongue for 7 years," she said. 7 years. "My dentist is about to send me a bill." Celeste almost laughed. "Almost." "What do you know?" she said. "Tell me what you know." Vivian turned off the burner. She came to the island and she sat across from her sister. She folded her hands on the counter the way their mother had taught them both. Folded hands meant you were about to say something important, and you were going to say it straight. "Her name is Jade," Vivian said. "Jade Simmons, his personal assistant. She started working for him about 14 months ago." She paused. "Keisha Thornton told me. From the salon. Her cousin works in the building." 14 months. Celeste sat with that number. 14 months ago was November. 14 months ago, she had been 4 months pregnant. A pregnancy that had taken 2 rounds of IVF, which stood for in vitro fertilization, and 3 miscarriages before this one. 14 months ago, she had been terrified and exhausted and leaning on Marcus more than she had ever let herself lean on anyone. 14 months ago, he had held her hand at the second ultrasound and cried. She had thought those were real tears, Lord. She had thought those were real tears. "How long has Keisha known?" Celeste said. Vivian pressed her lips together. "About 8 months. 8 months. Her sister had known for 8 months. Celeste looked at Vivian's face, at the guilt written there, at the love underneath the guilt, at the impossible position of a woman who had tried to protect her sister and had probably only delayed the wound.
"Okay," Celeste said. "Celeste."
"No. It's okay." She meant it. She was too tired to be angry at Vivian. She would be angry later briefly, and then she would let it go. "I need to call someone. Your mother?" "No, not yet." She stood up slowly, pressing one hand to the small of her back. "I need to call Camille Davenport." Vivian looked at her. "The attorney?" "Yes." "You know Camille Davenport?" "We went to Spelman together." Celeste was already reaching for her phone. Spelman College, the historically black women's college in Atlanta, where she had studied business. "She owes me 3 favors, and I am collecting one of them today." She stepped out of the kitchen into the hallway. She stopped at the mirror there, the antique oval mirror she had found at an estate sale, and restored herself. One of the few things in this house that was entirely hers. Chosen by her, paid for with her own money, hung by her own hands. She looked at herself, 7 months pregnant, dark circles. Her grandmother's bone structure looking back at her, the strong jaw, the high cheekbones. "I am not crazy. I know what I saw, I know what I read, and I know exactly what comes next." She dialed Camille's number. It rang twice. "Celeste Simms," Camille said. She had always called her Celeste Simms. "It is 7 in the morning." "I know," Celeste said. "I need you." A pause. "Tell me." "Marcus filed for divorce 3 days ago. I found the papers this morning." Another pause. Shorter. When Camille spoke again, her voice had shifted from sleepy friend to attorney. Precise. Alert. Like a door being locked from the inside. "Have you signed anything?" "No." "Have you responded to anything in writing?" "No. Do not move any money." Do not sign any documents. Do not speak to him without me present. A brief silence. Can you come to my office at 10? Yes. Bring the papers. Bring everything you have access to. Financial records, property documents, anything with both your names on it. Bring everything, Camille. Bring everything, Celeste. She hung up. She stood in the hallway. She looked at herself in the mirror one more time. Her grandmother used to say, when a door closes in your face, check the windows. Baby, there are always windows. There were windows. Celeste knew exactly where they were. She went back to the kitchen. Eat something, Vivian said, putting a plate in front of her. Scrambled eggs. Toast. The kind of breakfast their mother made when someone needed taking care of. Celeste sat down. She picked up her fork. He doesn't know, she said quietly. Vivian looked at her. Know what? Celeste shook her head slightly. Not yet. Some things you hold close until the right moment. Her grandmother had taught her that too. Never mind, she said. I'll tell you later. She ate her breakfast. Outside, the neighborhood went about its morning. And Celeste Simms Okafor, 7 months pregnant, sitting in the kitchen of a house she was about to leave, began, very quietly, to plan. The drive to Camille's office took 22 minutes. Celeste drove herself. Vivian had offered 3 times and she had said no 3 times. Not out of stubbornness, out of necessity. She needed those 22 minutes alone. She needed to let herself feel it before she walked into a room where feeling it would not serve her. She took the long way, down through the old neighborhood where she and Marcus had lived when they were first married. The apartment on 7th Street with the radiator that clanked every night and the view of the church steeple and the fire escape where she had grown tomatoes in containers their first summer together. She had been 23. He had been 31. She had thought his age meant he knew more than she did. She had confused experience with wisdom. She drove past the apartment building. It had been renovated. Glass and steel now. No fire escape. The church steeple still visible if you knew where to look. She kept driving. She thought about 14 months. She needed to think about it carefully. The way you need to examine something painful before you can set it down. 14 months ago was November of last year. She had been 4 months pregnant. She had been terrified, trying not to show it, leaning on Marcus more than she had ever let herself lean on anyone. 14 months ago, they had had dinner together. Just the two of them. A Sunday night. She had made his mother's jollof rice and fried plantains, and he had eaten 2 helpings, and she had thought, we are okay. We are getting through this rough patch, and we are okay. He had already hired Jade Simmons. She turned onto the highway. The city spread out ahead of her. Downtown Birmingham gleaming in the October morning. The Okafor Global Holdings building visible from the interstate. The newest tower on the skyline. 32 floors, his name in steel letters across the top, his name, which was also her name. She had given 11 years of her professional life to that building, not inside it. She had her own work, had always had her own work. Her work was quiet. Her work did not have a building with her name on it. Her work was the kind that happened in accountants' offices and attorneys' meetings, and carefully timed phone calls with board members who were beginning to trust her more than they trusted the man whose name was on the door. Her work was the reason she was not destroyed right now. Not whole. She was not whole. She was 7 months pregnant, and her husband had filed for divorce, and her sister had known about the affair for 8 months. She was not whole, but she was not destroyed. And there was a difference. The anger came up then. Hot, clean. Like something that had been waiting behind a door she had kept locked for a long time. She let it come. She did not fight it. She had learned that fighting the anger never worked. The anger always won eventually. Better to let it come, to feel the full shape of it, and then to set it down somewhere useful. She thought about the gala photograph. The 2 of them in the green dress and his charcoal suit, his arm around her, both of them looking at the camera. That photograph was going to run in next Thursday's Birmingham Business Journal. The entire city was going to see it. The entire community. Everyone who had stood in that ballroom and watched them, and he had already filed. She thought about the prenatal vitamins next to the divorce papers. The specific cruelty of that. Whether it was intentional. Whether he had placed them that way on purpose, or whether he had simply set the envelope down without thinking, the way you set something down when you are not thinking about the person who will find it, because you have already stopped thinking about her. The second possibility was worse. Camille Davenport's office was on the 12th floor of a building downtown, with a view of the 16th Street Baptist Church. The church where 4 little girls had died in a bombing in 1963, the church that had become the symbol of everything Birmingham carried and everything it had survived. Either Camille had chosen this view intentionally, or it was the best kind of coincidence. Camille had a way of reminding you, without ever saying so directly, that black women in Birmingham had survived harder things than this and had kept walking. The receptionist showed her in immediately. Camille was already standing when Celeste came through the door. She was 47, though she carried it like someone who had earned every year. The kind of woman who wore her age like a well-tailored suit. Nothing hidden. Everything intentional. She had graduated Spelman the year after Celeste. They had overlapped for 2 years. Celeste had met her at a Black Women in Business mentorship luncheon and had not let go of the connection since. "Sit," Camille said. She looked at Celeste's belly with the directness of someone taking inventory. "How are you feeling?" "Like I need a lawyer," Celeste said. "You have one." Camille sat across from her. "Show me." Celeste laid the envelope on the desk. Camille opened it. She read. She was very quiet for a long time. Camille's silence meant she was thinking hard. Camille thinking hard meant the situation required it. "Hargrove and Associates," Camille said. "Do you know them?" "I know Cornelius Hargrove. We have been on opposite sides twice." She set the papers down. "He is good." Which means Marcus spent some time on this. Celeste felt that land. He had spent time on it. He had planned this. He had planned it while she was going to prenatal appointments and setting up a nursery and standing next to him at foundation galas in green dresses. "There is something I need to tell you," Celeste said. "Something about assets that Marcus is not aware of." Camille looked at her steadily. "Tell me," Celeste told her. She told her about Okafor Family Enterprises, the original company, the dry cleaning and commercial laundry business that Reginald and Eugenia Okafor had built starting in 1978, starting with one machine in a storefront on 3rd Avenue, growing it over 20 years into a regional commercial laundry empire that served hotels and hospitals and university dining services across 4 states. She told her how Marcus had spun off Okafor Global Holdings from that foundation. He had used the original company's assets and credit history and community reputation as the base from which to launch his real estate and investment ventures. In doing so, he had structured things in a way that made Okafor Family Enterprises a separate entity, still owned primarily by his parents, still operating its original business. And then she told her the part Marcus did not know. 7 years ago, Celeste said, Reginald Sr. had a health scare, a serious one. His heart. Eugenia called me, not Marcus, me. She said Reginald was worried about what would happen to the original company if something happened to him. Their shares were split between the two of them and Marcus, with Marcus holding 32%. Camille was very still. Eugenia said she did not trust Marcus's judgment with the foundational business, Celeste continued. She had watched him make decisions that were good for the new company, but would have cannibalized the original one if he had more control of it. She paused. She asked me if I would be willing to purchase their shares incrementally, not Marcus's shares, just theirs, through a holding company set up in my name. She said she would rather the business be controlled by me than by Marcus's business instincts. Silence in the office, she said. And I am quoting exactly, Celeste said. My son married you because he thought you would make him look better. My husband and I kept you because we understood that you were better. A longer silence. Over 7 years, Celeste said, I purchased their combined shares in Okafor Family Enterprises, incrementally, through a holding company called Simms Legacy Investments, LLC, Simms being my grandmother's maiden name. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. I now hold 61% of Okafor Family Enterprises. She set the folder on the desk. Marcus holds 32%. The remaining 7% is held by 2 non-family investors, Bernard Tate and Sonia Everett. Camille opened the folder. She read for a long time. She turned pages carefully, the way she did when she was reading something that was changing the shape of the room. She set the folder down. She looked at Celeste. Something moved across her face that Celeste had not seen before in all their years of knowing each other. Does he know? Camille said. No, Celeste said. I paid fair market value for every share. Every transaction was legal and clean. The holding company was structured correctly. His parents made the decision on their own, in consultation with their own attorney. Lavinia Chambers, she is 70 years old and has been practicing in Birmingham for 40 years and does not make mistakes. Okafor Family Enterprises is the foundational asset, Camille said slowly, working it through. If you control 61% of Okafor Family Enterprises, then I control the foundation on which Okafor Global Holdings was built, Celeste said, not the holdings company itself. That is Marcus's separately structured entity, but the original company, the one he used as collateral for his first 3 major loans, the one whose commercial contracts he leveraged to secure his first real estate deals, the one whose name and community reputation he has been trading on for 15 years. That's yours, Camille said. That is mine, Celeste said. Camille sat back in her chair. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, the 16th Street Baptist Church stood in the October morning light, solid and still, the way things stand when they have survived the unsurvivable. He filed for divorce, Camille said. He did, without knowing this. Without knowing this, Camille shook her head slowly. Then very quietly, she said, the law is very clear on this, and I want you to understand. Very clear is a beautiful thing. Celeste looked at her attorney, and for the first time since she had found the envelope that morning, she felt something other than cold. Something that was not grief and not shock and not the particular exhaustion of a woman who has been carrying something heavy for longer than anyone knew. She felt the edges of a plan beginning to take shape. Being strong does not mean I deserved this. I kept his secrets and he sold mine. And I am done being quiet about what I built while he was looking the other way. She straightened in her chair. She looked at the folder on the desk between them. Her grandmother's name on the holding company. 7 years of careful, invisible work. Every document clean. Every transaction legal. Every decision made with the full knowledge of what she was protecting and why. What do we do next? She said. Camille looked at her with the expression of someone who has been waiting for exactly that question. We prepare, she said. We prepare for everything. She did not go home after Camille's office. She drove to her mother's house, not because she was ready to tell her mother. She was not ready. Lorraine Simms was 62 years old and had raised 2 daughters on a teacher's salary after Celeste's father left when Celeste was 9. She had spent every year since then believing that Marcus Okafor was the answer to every prayer she had ever prayed for her youngest child. Telling Lorraine would require more strength than Celeste had available right now. But she sat outside the house on Crescent Street for 22 minutes. She sat in the car and looked at the azalea bushes her mother had planted the year Celeste started high school. They bloomed pink every spring without fail. Every single spring. Even the year the ice storm had come through and stripped everything else bare, the azaleas had come back. Her mother had stood on the front porch and said, they always come back. She sat in the car and she breathed. She watched the neighborhood. A woman walking her dog. 2 kids on bikes. Someone's music from a window, something gospel. The kind her grandmother kept on low in the kitchen when she was cooking. She let the music reach her. Just for a moment. The car smelled like her prenatal vitamins and the cedar car freshener she had hung on the mirror 3 months ago, and the coffee she had drunk too fast on the way over. She could taste the coffee still. Bitter. Strong. The real kind, not the decaf she was supposed to be drinking. She had stopped at a coffee shop on the way. Ordered a full cup. Sat in the parking lot for 6 minutes, just holding it, the warmth of it in her hands, the smell of it. Something that was entirely hers, that no one was managing, that no one had an opinion about. She had needed those 6 minutes more than she could have explained to anyone. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she almost did not recognize. Then she did. Candace Whitfield, the pastor's wife. Celeste. I have been praying for you all morning, and I do not know why, except that I do. Call me when you can. She stared at that text for a long time, the pastor's wife. Which meant either Candace Whitfield had some kind of genuine gift of discernment, or information was moving through the community faster than Marcus had anticipated. She put the phone in her bag without answering. She thought about the community. She needed to think about it the way Camille thought about legal strategy. Clearly, with full understanding of the terrain. The community was 1 Corinthians Baptist Church, where she and Marcus had been married 14 years ago, where Reverend Whitfield had performed the ceremony, where Sterling had been baptized, where she sang in the anniversary choir every October and had for 11 years. The community was the Birmingham chapter of the National Association of Black Business Professionals, where Marcus was a founding board member and where she had served as treasurer for 6 years. The community was the Okafor Foundation Gala, which she had organized for 9 consecutive years. The community was the neighborhood. The school board meetings she attended alone because Marcus was always traveling. The salon where Vivian worked and where the information about Jade Simmons had reached her sister 8 months ago through Keisha Thornton. The community knew things. It always did. The question was never whether they knew. The question was what they would do with what they knew. And that depended on who spoke first and who they believed. Marcus had a 20-year head start in that community. He had his father's name, his father's reputation, his father standing at 1 Corinthians. Reginald Okafor Sr. was a deacon emeritus. That was not nothing. But Celeste had things Marcus had never thought to count. She had organized 9 galas. She had served on 3 nonprofit boards. She had quietly funded the renovation of the children's wing of 1 Corinthians Fellowship Hall, not through the foundation, which was Marcus's foundation with Marcus's name, but from her own accounts, written as a personal donation from Celeste Simms Okafor. She had understood, even years ago, that it mattered to have her name on something that was hers. She had her grandmother's history in this city. Dorothy Mae Simms had been born in Birmingham in 1948 and had grown up 4 blocks from the 16th Street Baptist Church and had known every family that mattered in this community for 78 years. The Simms name in Birmingham opened doors that money alone could not open, and she had the truth. She started the car. She drove to the house on Oak Hill Road, not to Magnolia Ridge Drive. She had already decided she would not sleep there again tonight. She drove to the house on Oak Hill Road, the house she had purchased 18 months ago through Simms Legacy Investments, LLC, a 4-bedroom brick house in a quiet neighborhood that she had furnished slowly and carefully. She had never spent the night there, but it had been ready always, for the moment she needed it. Her grandmother had told her, always have somewhere to go. Always, I do not care how happy you are. Always have somewhere that is yours alone, that no one can take from you, that has your name on the deed and your name only. Promise me. She had promised. The house on Oak Hill Road smelled like cedar and the citrus candles she had placed throughout in case she ever needed to arrive and feel immediately at home. She walked through the rooms. The nursery she had set up here too, smaller than the one on Magnolia Ridge, but ready. The baby would not know the difference between rooms. The baby would only know if she was held. She sat on the bed in the master bedroom and she let herself cry. Not the careful, controlled kind of crying she had done in Camille's office. The other kind. The kind that came from 14 years of a life and 14 months of not knowing, and 3 miscarriages before this baby, and the green dress, and the gala photograph, and the prenatal vitamins sitting next to the divorce papers. She cried for 20 minutes. Then she washed her face. Then she called her sister. I need you to know something, she said when Vivian answered. I'm not broken. I know you're not, Vivian said. I need you to not treat me like I'm about to break. I need you to treat me like what I am, which is a woman with a plan. A pause. Do you have a plan? I have the beginning of one. Tell me, not yet, soon. She looked at herself in the mirror above the dresser. A simple beveled rectangle. Nothing dramatic. V. Who in the neighborhood knew? Who knew about Jade Simmons before Keisha told you? She heard her sister exhale slowly. Honey, tell me, the Hendersons. And Deacon Williams's wife, Marvella. And I think Pastor Whitfield knew something, maybe not about Jade specifically, but something. The pastor. The pastor had known or suspected and had said nothing to her. She thought about Candace Whitfield's text. Candace had not known, but she had felt something, which meant the pastor had not told his own wife, which meant he had been protecting someone. She filed that away. Okay, Celeste said. What are you going to do? I'm going to sleep. I have a meeting with Camille tomorrow morning and I need to be clear for it. She pulled the covers back on the bed she had made in this house that no one knew was hers. And V, I need you to not say anything to anyone yet. Not Mama, not Keisha, nobody. Can you do that for how long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Celeste, 2 weeks is V. I need 2 weeks before this becomes a community conversation. Once it becomes a community conversation, I lose control of the narrative. And I cannot afford to lose control of the narrative. A long pause. 2 weeks, Vivian said. After that, I am telling Mama and I am going to need to say some words to Marcus Okafor in a public location. 2 weeks, Celeste agreed. Thank you. She lay in the dark of the house on Oak Hill Road and she thought about the community, about the church, about the gala photographs, about Candace Whitfield's text and Keisha Thornton and Marvella Williams and the Hendersons. The community was already humming. She could feel it the way you feel weather coming. Something in the air. A pressure change. A heaviness that meant the storm was already on its way. She was going to be inside when it arrived. She was going to be the one who set the table. She closed her eyes. The baby rolled slowly, side to side. She pressed her hand to the place where she could feel the movement and she stayed there, breathing, until her heartbeat slowed. I've got you, she said. I promise I have got you. The house was quiet. The citrus candles had burned down to a low scent, something clean and faint in the dark. The neighborhood outside was still. One car passing, slow, the sound of it coming and then going. The refrigerator humming from the kitchen. The ordinary sounds of a house settling into night. She had chosen this house because it had a front porch, because it was on a quiet street, because it had a room with an east-facing window where morning light would land, because it was hers completely and entirely hers, with her name on the deed and no one else's. She was not starting from nothing. She had never been starting from nothing. She had just needed the space to remember that. She slept. She had not planned to think about Jade Simmons yet. There were things that came first. The legal strategy, the financial picture, her own stability. But the mind does not always follow the order you set for it. At 3 in the morning in the house on Oak Hill Road, she found herself thinking about a 26-year-old woman she had never met, Jade Simmons. She knew the name now. She knew the approximate age. She knew the position. Personal assistant. In Marcus's world, that meant someone who managed his calendar and his correspondence and his travel, and the 1,000 daily tasks that kept his professional life running. She had once held that role herself. Not officially, functionally. In the early years of the marriage when he was building the business, and she was the one who kept everything organized and running while presenting to the world the image of a supportive wife. She had not been paid for that work. She had not been credited for it. She had done it because she had believed they were building something together, and that the building was the point. She thought about being 26. She remembered what 26 had felt like. The specific combination of ambition and inexperience and the dangerous certainty that you were the exception, that the rules applied to everyone else, that when a powerful man looked at you as if you were the most interesting person in the room, it was because you were. She thought, this woman is not my enemy. This was not generosity, it was clarity. Jade Simmons had not made any vows to her. Marcus Okafor had made every vow to her. At the altar of 1 Corinthians Baptist Church, in front of Reverend Whitfield and 214 people, with her grandmother in the front row, Marcus had made vows. Jade Simmons had made none. She thought about what Marcus had probably told Jade. She knew his vocabulary when he wanted something. She had been on the receiving end of it at 23. She knew how he described his marriage when he wanted sympathy. The wife who had grown distant. The relationship that had run its course. The two people staying together for the children and for appearances. She knew how he made himself the victim of his own choices. She thought, she probably believes him. She is probably sitting somewhere tonight believing every word he said. She thought, she will learn. The way I learned. The hard way is the only way some lessons arrive. She pressed her hand to her belly. The baby was quiet now. The slow nighttime stillness she had come to find reassuring. Your grandmother is going to love you, she said quietly. Your great-grandmother is going to love you even more. You are coming into a family of women who know how to stand up. I need you to know that before you get here. You are coming into something strong. She lay there, and she thought about all the women before her. Dorothy Mae Simms, born 1948, who had survived things Celeste would never fully know about because Grandma Dot did not give pain more air than it required. Lorraine Simms, born 1962, who had raised two daughters alone on a teacher's salary and never once let either of them see her flinch. Vivian, born 1988, who had built a business from nothing and paid every single invoice herself. She came from women who knew how to carry weight without showing the strain. She was not starting from scratch. She was starting from experience. And experience was the only form of wealth that could not be seized in a divorce settlement. The night was fully dark now. 3:47 in the morning, according to the clock on the nightstand. She had been lying awake for over an hour, her mind moving through the rooms of her life, opening doors she had kept closed. The apartment on 7th Street, the fire-escape tomatoes, the radiator that clanked. The Sunday night when she had made his mother's jollof rice and he had eaten 2 helpings, and she had thought, we are okay, Lord. She had been explaining things away for so long she had forgotten she was doing it. The memory came up fast and specific the way the sharpest ones do. She was in the kitchen at Magnolia Ridge Drive, about 2 years ago. She had been on the phone with Sterling's school about a scheduling conflict, and Marcus had walked in and waited, and when she hung up he had said, very casually, you should let my office handle things like that. You do not have to do all of that yourself. She had said, I don't mind. He had said, I know you don't. But it's not necessary. That's what the office staff is for. She had understood at the time that he was trying to be helpful. She had understood it as consideration, as the kind of thing a man says when he wants to take something off your plate. She understood now what it had actually been. It had been about removing her from the visible work of their family, about making her more ornamental, about making it easier for him to be the one people came to, the one people called, the one whose name they associated with every decision and every outcome. She had been code switching for his comfort for 14 years. She had been managing his image and his family and his foundation and his social calendar while quietly, separately, carefully building something of her own. She had been doing both things at once. He had only ever seen one of them. The anger came again, but it was different this time, colder, more focused, less like fire and more like a compass needle settling. She knew what she had done. She knew what she had built. She knew exactly what the board meeting of Okafor Family Enterprises would mean when she walked into that room as the majority shareholder of a company he thought he had leverage over. She got up. She made herself a cup of chamomile tea, the only kind her doctor had not restricted. She took it to the kitchen table and she sat, and she opened her laptop and she began to review the financial documents she had spent 6 months carefully compiling. She was not reacting. She was preparing. There was a difference. She needed to remember the difference. She thought about the 2 years she had spent watching Eugenia Okafor manage the original company with one hand while running her household with the other. She thought about the way Eugenia had explained the commercial laundry contracts, the hospital accounts, the university dining service relationships, the drivers who had been on the same routes for 20 years. That is not just a business, Eugenia had said once. That is 47 families. You do not dismantle 47 families to fund a real estate portfolio. Not on my watch. Not on mine either, Celeste thought. She worked until 5 in the morning. The neighborhood began to lighten around her, the first birds. A car starting somewhere down the street, the refrigerator still humming, the tea gone cold in the mug beside her laptop. She thought, I was not starting from nothing. I was starting from everything I chose not to tell him. And a woman who knows what she is holding and stays quiet about it and waits for the right moment is not a woman who has been defeated. She is a woman who is not finished yet. He came to the house on Magnolia Ridge Drive 4 days after the papers were served. She was there. She had gone back to collect specific things. Documents. Her grandmother's wooden bowl. The photo of Sterling from the hallway mirror. The things that were hers in the bone-deep way that no court would need to decide. She had been there for 2 hours, moving carefully through rooms she had lived in for 11 years, when she heard his key in the door. The sound of it hit her somewhere behind the sternum. Not pain exactly. Recognition. The specific recognition of a sound you have heard 10,000 times and are now hearing for the last time, and you know it. He was not expecting her. She could tell from the way he came in. Loosely, without the careful containment he wore when he knew she was watching. He came in with the ease of a man who believed the house was already his. He stopped when he saw her in the hallway. A fraction of a second. His face doing the work of processing something that did not fit the picture he had prepared for. Celeste, he said. His voice was controlled. Marcus, she said. He looked at Camille. He was not with Camille here, of course. He looked at her in the way he looked at information he needed to recalibrate around. I wasn't expecting you. I know, she said. He looked at the bag in her hand, the wooden bowl sitting on top of it. Stir photo tucked along the side. He looked at her belly, the pregnancy he had filed papers to complicate. Something moved across his face. Guilt or grief or something in between. Then he put a no, he said, that I am going to provide for the baby. That is not in question. I have an attorney, she said. He paused. Camille Davenport. She looked at him. You know already. Cornelius called me this morning. A beat. She is good. She is. He put his hands in his pockets. Celeste, I know this is not how you wanted this to go. The anger came up fast, hot, clean. She did not let it show. She stored it somewhere. What I want, she said carefully, does not seem to have been relevant to your decision-making for some time. He flinched, small, controlled. She saw it. I was going to tell you after the baby, he said. That was the plan. Wait until. After the baby, she repeated. She let that land. She let him hear what it sounded like. A man who had planned to let her give birth and recover from childbirth, and then present her with the dissolution of her marriage. The silence in the hallway was considerable. I need you to know, he said, and his voice had changed. Softer now. The private voice instead of the boardroom voice. That I didn't want it to be like this, that what we had was real. For a long time it was real. She looked at him. She thought, you loved me the way people love something useful. You loved me the way you loved the original company. Because of what it made possible. Not for what it was in itself. And now you think you can move on to something newer, and I will simply dissolve into whatever settlement your attorney proposes. She said, Marcus, I need you to go. He stood there for a moment. He looked at her with something she could not entirely read. Maybe genuine sorrow. Maybe the specific sorrow of a man who is beginning to suspect that he has miscalculated. The baby, he said. Whatever else is happening, the baby is important to me. The baby, she said, is everything to me. Which is why I need you to leave now so I can finish what I came here to do. He left. She stood in the hallway and listened to his car back out of the driveway. She looked at herself in the antique oval mirror. At her face, which was very still. At her belly. At her own eyes looking back at her. Then she did something she had not done in years. She sat down on the floor of the hallway. Right there. On the hardwood she had chosen herself. The wide plank white oak that had taken 3 weeks to install and that she had loved from the moment it was finished. She sat down on it with her back against the wall and her hands loose in her lap and her eyes closed. She stayed there for a long time. The house smelled like his cologne. Faint now, the residue of someone who had been there and was gone. It was mixed with the smell of the wood and the particular dust and flowers smell of a house that had been lived in by the same family for over a decade. Her candles, the cleaning products she had always chosen, the ghost of 11 years of Sunday dinners. She pressed her hands flat to the floor. She felt the wood under her palms. Cool, solid, real. Lord, this is a floor I chose. This is a house I helped build. These are rooms I filled with a life. And I am sitting on this floor because the man I shared it with left divorce papers next to my prenatal vitamins and drove away. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth, the way her doctor had taught her for the moments when her blood pressure climbed. She thought about 14 years. She thought about what 14 years meant in terms of daily decisions. What to cook, what to wear to his events, which relationships to prioritize, which of her own ambitions to fold quietly into the background so his could take up more room. She had made 1,000 small concessions, each one reasonable in isolation, each one barely worth noting. But added together, accumulated, 14 years of them, they had become the shape of her life. I thought loving him was enough to protect us. I was wrong, and I am done being wrong in the same direction. She sat there until the house finished its particular silence around her. Then she pressed her hands harder against the floor, using it the way you use something solid when you are getting up from something that knocked you down. She stood. She picked up her bag. She picked up her grandmother's wooden bowl. She picked up Sterling's photo. She walked out of the house on Magnolia Ridge Drive without looking back. She drove to Oak Hill Road. She walked through the door of the house that was hers. She put her grandmother's wooden bowl on the kitchen counter, and she looked at it there, and she thought, there is the beginning of what this house will look like. There is the beginning of the life I am going to build inside it. She went to the nursery. She sat in the rocking chair, her grandmother's rocking chair, refinished by her own hands, in a room she had prepared for a baby who was going to arrive in 6 weeks. She rocked slowly. The chair made its familiar sound against the floor. She thought about the board meeting that was coming. She thought about the shares. 61%. The number she had been carrying for 7 years, quietly, carefully, like something you keep in your inside pocket and check on, just to make sure it is still there. It was still there. She sat in the rocking chair and she breathed, and she let the next part of her plan begin to take shape. Not rushed, not reactive. Precise. Measured. The way she did everything that mattered. The baby moved against her ribs. A slow, rolling greeting. I know, she said. I know, we're getting there. The evening settled around the house on Oak Hill Road. The light changed from gold to gray. The neighborhood came alive with the sounds of dinner being made, children being called inside, dogs being walked, the particular music of ordinary life continuing the way ordinary life does, without ceremony, without apology, regardless of what is breaking open inside the house as it moves past. She was inside one of those houses now. Her house. Her name on the deed. She was not finished. She was, in fact, just beginning. She drove to Birmingham on a Friday, not because she had announced she was coming. She had learned from her grandmother that some visits require no announcement, only arrival. She pulled into the driveway of the house on Elm Hill, where Dorothy Mae Simms had lived for 51 years. The house where Celeste's mother had grown up, where Celeste had spent every significant summer of her childhood, where she had learned to cook and to pray and to be still and to think. The driveway crackled under her tires, dry leaves, red gravel that had been the same red gravel for as long as she could remember. The sound of it was a specific and irreplaceable sound, the sound of arriving somewhere that had always been safe. Grandma Dot was on the front porch. She was always on the front porch in the mornings, in her housecoat and her good slippers, with her Bible and her coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up the way she had watched it for 51 years. The porch smelled like coffee and the particular October smell of Birmingham, which was red clay and cut grass and something sweet she had never been able to name. A sweetness that came from nowhere she could point to and was everywhere all at once. She looked at Celeste coming up the walk and she said nothing. She simply moved her Bible from the empty chair beside her to her lap and waited. Celeste sat down. The morning air was cool enough to feel on her arms. She could hear a dog somewhere down the block, a lawnmower starting up, the sound of a screen door opening and closing from the house across the street. She sat there for a long time. Grandma Dot did not ask questions. She waited. She had been waiting 78 years and she knew how to do it without making the other person feel the weight of it. He filed for divorce, Celeste said. I know, Grandma Dot said. Celeste looked at her. How long have you known? About a month. Her grandmother's face was unreadable in the way of someone who has learned to keep pain from taking up more room than it deserves. Eugenia called me. Eugenia Okafor, Marcus's mother, had called her grandmother. She called you, Celeste said. She did. She wanted me to know before it happened. She's upset. Grandma Dot's voice was careful. She said she had tried to talk to Marcus and he had not listened. She said she was ashamed of him. Celeste felt something shift in her chest. Eugenia Okafor, 68 years old, the woman who had built a laundry empire from one machine on 3rd Avenue, who had handed Celeste a key to her offices and called her better than her own son, had called Dorothy Mae Simms to say she was ashamed. She thought about what that had cost Eugenia. She thought about what it meant for what came next. "Grandma," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Ask." "When you gave me that advice about always having something that was mine, always having somewhere to go, did you know? Did you know this was going to happen?" Her grandmother was quiet for a long time. A car went by. The dog down the block stopped barking. The October morning moved around them like water moving around two still things in the middle of a current. "I know people," Dorothy Mae Simms said finally. "I have known people for 78 years. And what I know is this. A man who believes he built everything is a man who is going to think he can take everything, whether that man is good or bad. Good men have made that mistake too." She paused. Her hands rested on her Bible, easy and still. "Your grandfather was a good man and he made that mistake, and I nearly lost everything we built together when he passed. Because his name was on what should have been our name." She paused again. "I was not going to let that happen to my granddaughter." Celeste thought about the shares. 61% of Okafor Family Enterprises, held in Simms Legacy Investments, LLC, 7 years of incremental purchases, each one documented, each one legal, each one invisible to the man who thought he understood the full picture of what he owned. "He doesn't know," she said. "No," her grandmother said. "He does not know. When he finds out, he will understand," her grandmother said, "what it means to have underestimated a woman who learned from me." She looked at Celeste directly for the first time since she had sat down. Her eyes were dark and steady and very clear. The eyes of someone who has seen the worst of things and has decided permanently not to be undone by them. "Baby, I did not raise you to be anybody's decoration. Get up." "I am up," Celeste said. "Good." Her grandmother patted her knee once, the way she had patted her knee since Celeste was 4 years old, with the same weight and the same warmth and the same absolute certainty. "Now come inside and let me feed you something proper. You look like you have been living on stress and that terrible decaf coffee." Celeste laughed. A real one. The kind that hurt a little because it came from somewhere genuinely surprised by itself. The kind of laugh she had not managed in over a week. She went inside. Her grandmother's kitchen smelled like coffee and grease, and the particular warmth of a house that has been lived in by someone who takes cooking seriously, not as performance, as care. The stove was old, and the counters were worn, and the linoleum had a soft spot near the refrigerator that had been there for as long as Celeste could remember. She sat at the kitchen table she had sat at since she was 4 years old, and she watched her grandmother move through the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who has made the same breakfast 1,000 times and still finds it worth doing correctly. The smell of butter going into the cast iron, the sound of the pan finding its heat, the scratch of a match against the box when the pilot did not catch on the first try, the soft exhale when the flame took. Celeste folded her hands on the table. She felt the wood under her palms, smooth in the middle where 1,000 meals had been eaten, rougher at the edges where the varnish had worn away years ago and never been replaced because her grandmother said a table should look like it has been used. "Grandma Dot," she said. Her grandmother said, "Cracking eggs, the baby's a girl." Her grandmother turned from the stove. Something crossed her face, something enormous and private, and then carefully contained. The way she contained everything, not hidden, held. There was a difference, and Celeste had spent 34 years learning it. "I know what you're going to name her," she said. "Dorothy Celeste," Celeste said. "If that's okay." Her grandmother turned back to the stove. Her shoulders moved once. Just once. A small motion that could have been anything and was clearly everything. "It is okay," she said. Her voice was steady. "It is more than okay." They ate breakfast together in the kitchen on Elm Hill. Grandma Dot's scrambled eggs, made the way she had always made them, low and slow and finished with just enough butter to make them taste like something. Toast cut on the diagonal. Sweet tea even in the morning, because her grandmother believed sweet tea was appropriate at any hour, and anyone who disagreed was welcome to make their own breakfast. The food tasted like being known, like being somewhere that required nothing of her except her presence. For a little while, she let herself be someone's granddaughter, entirely, without the weight of strategy or grief or the approaching board meeting or the community's expectations, without the divorce papers, without the gala photograph, without 14 months and a 26-year-old and her sister biting her tongue. Just the kitchen, just the eggs, Just Grandma Dot's slippers on the linoleum, and the sound of the neighbor's lawnmower finishing its run, and the smell of coffee and the morning light coming through the window over the sink, the way it had come through that window every morning since 1973. After breakfast, she helped wash the dishes. Her grandmother washed and she dried, the way it had always been, the two of them standing side by side at the sink, not saying much, the water warm on her hands. The dish towel soft from 1,000 washings, the sound of the drain. I thought loving him was enough to protect us. I was wrong, and I am done being wrong in the same direction. She set a plate in the drying rack. She picked up another. She was not the same woman who had driven out of Birmingham 14 years ago to build a life with Marcus Okafor. She was not the woman who had stood at the altar of 1 Corinthians and made promises she had kept and watched him make promises he had broken. She was not that woman anymore. She was the woman who had been building something underneath all of that, quietly, without announcement, with her grandmother's name on the holding company and her grandmother's wisdom in her hands and her grandmother's voice in her ear, saying, "Baby, always have somewhere to go." She had somewhere to go. She was already there. Her son called her on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the papers were served. Sterling was 16. He was at his father's. She had agreed to let him finish the month at Magnolia Ridge because she would not disrupt his school routine. She would not be the parent who used logistics as a weapon. She had been waiting for him to call, knowing he would, knowing he was processing it the way he processed everything. Slowly, in private, and then all at once. "Mom," he said. "Hey, baby." His voice was careful in the way teenage boys' voices are careful when they are working hard not to sound as young as they feel. She knew that careful. She had been listening to his voice for 16 years and she knew every register it had. "Dad told me about the divorce." "I know." A silence. She let it be there. She was sitting in the kitchen of the house on Oak Hill Road, eating soup she had made from scratch because making soup from scratch was the thing her hands needed tonight. The chopping and stirring and the particular alchemy of something becoming nourishment. The smell of it filled the kitchen. Onion and garlic and the chicken stock she had made last week from the carcass of the roasted chicken she had made for Sunday dinner. Her grandmother's method. Nothing wasted. "Is the baby okay?" Sterling said. "The baby is perfect," she said. "She's kicking a lot. She's already bossy." A quiet sound from Sterling. Not quite a laugh, but close. The beginning of one that he did not quite let happen. "When do I get to see you?" "Whenever you want, baby. This is always your home, too." Both of them. Another silence. She heard him breathing. She knew that breathing. It was the breathing he did when he was working up to saying the real thing, the thing underneath the thing he had led with. "Mom, did you know, before?" She thought about the answer. She owed her son honesty. She owed him the truth in the form he could carry. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "I didn't know the specific something. But you knew." "Part of me knew," she said. "The part of me I kept very quiet." He was silent for a moment. She heard him shift. The sound of him sitting somewhere in the house on Magnolia Ridge Drive, the house she had lived in for 11 years and was not going to miss the way she had expected to miss it. "I love Dad," he said. "I know you do. I'm also really angry at him." "That's allowed," she said. "Both things can be true at the same time. You can love someone and be angry at what they did. Are you angry?" She looked at her soup. She thought about the divorce papers next to the prenatal vitamins. She thought about the gala photograph. She thought about 14 months and Jade Simmons and her sister biting her tongue for 8 months, and Grandma Dot saying, "Baby, I did not raise you to be anybody's decoration." "Yes," she said, "but not in a way that's going to make me small. I'm angry in the way that makes you want to build something." Sterling was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, and it came out all at once, the way the real things always came out with him, not measured and not careful, just true. "You're the best parent I have, Mom. I just need you to know that." She pressed her hand to her mouth. She held the phone very still. "Sterling," she said when she could, "I know that's probably not what you want to hear, because you want me to love both of you equally, and I do love both of you. But I also know the difference between someone who shows up and someone who performs showing up, and I just—" He stopped, took a breath. "I just needed to say it." "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady. She had decided that much. Her voice would be steady for her son. "Are you okay?" "I'm going to be," she said, "I promise you. Not just okay, better than okay. But I need some time to get there." "Okay," he said. "And then, Mom," I told Rashida, "she's really upset. She's talking about moving out of Dad's." Rashida, Marcus's 19-year-old daughter from his first relationship, who had lived with them since she was 12, who called Celeste Mom without having been asked to, who was at Howard University, the historically black university in Washington, D.C. studying pre-law with the intensity of someone who had decided very young that the world was not going to sort itself out and someone needed to have the vocabulary to address it. "Tell her not to make any big decisions yet," Celeste said. "Tell her I love her, and I'll call her this week, and she needs to stay at school and focus. She's going to call you before you call her." "I know." She almost smiled. Rashida did not wait for anyone. Let her. After she hung up with Sterling, she sat with the soup going cold and she thought about her children. Her son, who knew the difference between showing up and performing showing up. Her daughter still waiting to be born. Her stepdaughter 4 states away preparing to fight someone on her behalf whether she wanted it or not. She did what she always did when the pain got too big for her body. She picked up the phone to call her mother, and then she put it back down. Because her mother would hear it in her voice, and she was not ready for her mother to know. Not yet. 2 more weeks. She had asked for 2 weeks and she was going to use them. She set the phone on the counter. She turned back to the soup and she ate it slowly, standing at the counter instead of sitting at the table, because sometimes you eat at the counter and sometimes you don't. And tonight she needed to be close to something warm and steady, and the soup on the stove was the closest thing available. The baby moved, a long rolling movement, side to side, the ocean motion that had become her favorite physical sensation of the last 7 months. "I know," she said. "I'm okay, we're okay." She washed the pot. She turned off the lights. She went to the nursery and she sat in the rocking chair. She sat in the dark and she thought about Sterling's voice when he said, "You're the best parent I have, Mom." The specific way he had said it. Not as comfort, as fact. The way he delivered facts, with the quiet certainty of someone who has thought it through and arrived at a conclusion and sees no reason to decorate it. She thought about what it took to raise a child who understood the difference between showing up and performing showing up. She thought about 16 years of soccer games and school projects and late nights and hard conversations and the specific dailiness of being someone's mother. The 10,000 ordinary moments that no one sees and no one credits, and that are in the end the whole thing. She had done that work. She had shown up for it every day for 16 years. No settlement agreement, no divorce petition, no arm around her shoulder in a photograph taken 3 days too late was going to undo that. She was his mother. She was going to be her daughter's mother. That was hers permanently and completely, and it was the most important thing she had ever built. She rocked in the chair. The nursery was quiet around her. The east-facing window was dark now. She knew what the morning light looked like when it came through it. She had watched it come through every morning for 3 weeks. The way it moved across the floor. The particular warmth of it. The way it made the room feel like something was beginning. She had chosen this room for her daughter because of that light. She had chosen everything in this house with the same care she brought to everything she decided to keep. She was done keeping things that did not deserve to be kept. The board meeting of Okafor Family Enterprises was 4 weeks away. She had the shares, she had Camille. She had 7 years of documented, legal, clean transactions. She had Eugenia's knowledge and Reginald's silent understanding and Lavinia Chambers' 40 years of airtight practice. She also had something else. Something Marcus had never once thought to look for, because it had never occurred to him that it existed. She had patience. The specific patience of a woman who has been watching and waiting and building for 7 years without a single word. It was time to stop waiting. The contractions started on a Wednesday night, 2 weeks before the board meeting. Not real ones. The doctor would call them Braxton Hicks contractions, which was the medical term for the practice contractions a body has before the real work begins. But at 11:45 at night, alone in the house on Oak Hill Road, with her phone on the nightstand and the nursery door open down the hall, they did not feel like practice. They felt like her body saying, "You have been carrying too much." She timed them for 20 minutes. They were irregular. Not the pattern she had been told to watch for. But they were present and they were uncomfortable, and she was 7.5 months pregnant and she was alone. She called her doctor's answering service. The on-call physician told her to come in, just to be safe. She called Vivian. Vivian said, "I am on my way," before Celeste had finished the sentence. They sat in the triage room at Birmingham Medical Center for 4 hours. The baby's heartbeat was steady and strong on the monitor, a sound like a small determined engine, and the contractions slowed after the first hour and then stopped altogether by 2 in the morning. Stress-induced, the attending physician said. Common in late pregnancy. She needed to rest. She needed to reduce her stress levels. She needed to drink more water. She sat in the hospital bed and she thought about being told to reduce her stress levels. Vivian had gone to find coffee somewhere around 1 in the morning and had not yet come back, and the room was quiet except for the monitor and the sound of the hallway outside and the particular institutional sounds of a hospital at night which were different from the sounds of a hospital during the day. More deliberate, more aware of itself. She lay in the bed and she stared at the ceiling. The ceiling was white and featureless. She studied it the way you study something when you have nothing else to look at and no one to talk to, and the thing you are most afraid of has already happened today in a smaller version, and you are waiting to see if the larger version is still coming. Marcus was not there. She had not called him. She had considered it. She had picked up her phone and held it, and thought about what it would mean to call him, what he would say, what she would hear in his voice, whether it would be genuine or managed, whether she would be able to tell the difference anymore. She had put the phone back down, but not calling him and him not being there were the same absence from different directions. And the absence sat in the corner of the room, with her and Vivian's empty coffee-run chair, and the monitor and the ceiling and the 2 o'clock quiet. Lord, this is the lowest this gets. This right here. Me in a hospital ceiling and a baby who scared me tonight and a man who is not coming. She pressed one hand flat against her belly. The baby was still now. The healthy, heavy stillness of a baby sleeping inside a body that has finally stopped alarming her. She thought about Sterling. She thought about Rashida, who had called twice that week from Howard, and who would be upset if she found out about the hospital visit, and who Celeste had not yet told and was not going to tell tonight. She thought about her mother, who was asleep on Crescent Street right now under the quilt her own mother had made. 2 generations of women sleeping under the same quilt, and who did not know her youngest daughter was lying in a hospital bed at 2 in the morning. She thought about her grandmother. She picked up her phone. She did not dial. She held it. Then she dialed. Dorothy Mae Simms answered on the 3rd ring, at 2 in the morning, without a single note of irritation or alarm in her voice, as if she had been waiting for this call and had simply not known what time it would come. "I'm at the hospital," Celeste said. "The baby's fine. I'm fine. They think it was stress. I just..." She stopped. "I know," her grandmother said. "I don't know why I called." "Yes, you do." A silence. The hospital monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Someone in the hallway outside pushed a cart past the door. The fluorescent light above her hummed at a frequency she could feel in her back teeth. "Talk to me about something," Celeste said. "Anything." And her grandmother talked. For 40 minutes. She talked about the garden and what she was planting for next spring, and how she had decided to put in a rose of Sharon along the back fence, because she had always wanted one, and she was 78 years old, and if she wanted a rose of Sharon, she was going to have a rose of Sharon. She talked about the neighbor down the block whose son had come home from the Navy and who had stopped by with a sweet potato pie that was honestly not as good as hers, but you could tell the effort had been made, and that counted. She talked about a book she was reading, a novel about a woman in Louisiana in 9910, and about how some things do not change as much as people like to think they do, and some things change more than anyone is prepared for, and the skill is knowing which is which. She talked about nothing and everything. For 40 minutes. Her voice low and steady and warm through the phone. The sound of someone who has survived the unsurvivable and has come out the other side and is still here, still in her house on Elm Hill, still with her Rose of Sharon plans and her neighbor's almost good enough sweet potato pie and her book about Louisiana and her granddaughter's hand in her own across 400 miles of telephone wire. Celeste did not say much. She breathed, she held the phone. She let her grandmother's voice fill the room the way you let something warm fill a cold space, slowly, from the edges inward. Vivian came back with coffee at 2:45. She looked at Celeste's face. She sat down in the chair beside the bed and she did not say anything. She held out the coffee. Celeste shook her head. Vivian put it on the bedside table and she sat there and she was present, which was the thing Vivian had always been best at, the thing she had never once failed at in 34 years. The attending physician came back at 3:15 to check the monitor readings. Everything looked good. She could go home. She needed to follow up with her OB. Her primary obstetrician in the morning. She needed to rest. She nodded. She thanked them. She was very polite and very controlled, the way she had learned to be in medical settings, because the alternative was crying on a physician she did not know, and that was not something she was prepared to do at 3:15 in the morning. Vivian drove her home. They did not talk much in the car. The city was empty at that hour, the streets wet from a rain that had come and gone while they were inside. The lights of Birmingham reflected on the pavement, everything doubled and wavering in the water. She watched the lights pass. She counted them without meaning to. They got to Oak Hill Road at 3:54. Vivian pulled into the driveway. "You want me to stay?" she said. "No," Celeste said. "I'm okay." That was not convincing. "I know." She looked at her sister, at the worry in Vivian's face that she was not trying to hide. "I mean it, though. I need to be alone tonight. I need to sit with it." Vivian looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I'll be back in the morning." You don't have to. I'll be back in the morning, Vivian said again, not harshly, just absolutely. Celeste went inside. She stood in the hallway of the house on Oak Hill Road. The citrus candles had burned out days ago, and she had not replaced them, and the house smelled now like cedar and the soup from last Tuesday, and the particular smell of a house that is becoming itself, taking on the scent of the person living in it. She did not turn on many lights. She went to the nursery. She stood in the doorway. The east-facing window was dark. The rocking chair sat in the corner where she had placed it. The crib was assembled. The small dresser held the folded clothes she had washed last week, sorted by size, the smallest ones at the top because a baby arrives before she grows. She stood in the doorway for a long time. This is the darkest it gets. Right here. This is the bottom of it. A hospital visit at midnight, my grandmother's voice at 2 in the morning. My sister in the driveway at 3:54. A room I prepared for a daughter who is coming, and a life I am building from the ground up, and a man who is not here. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. But the shares are still mine, and the board meeting is still coming, and Camille is still preparing. And Eugenia called my grandmother before any of this happened, and that means I have allies he does not know about. She thought about that. She held it. The way you hold something small and warm in both hands when everything around it is cold. The shares. The holding company. Simms Legacy Investments, LLC, 61% of a company built from one machine in a storefront in 1978. 47 families. 6 hospitals, 4 hotel groups, 3 universities. The foundation that made everything else possible. It was hers. All of it was hers. And she had earned it not through inheritance or luck, or the grace of a man who had decided to be generous, but through 7 years of quiet, careful, deliberate work. She walked to the rocking chair. She sat down. She rocked slowly. The breakthrough begins underneath the breakdown, not beside it, not after it, underneath it, in the exact same moment. The place where you are most alone is also the place where you are most purely yourself. And the most purely yourself she had ever been was a woman who planned, who prepared, who held things carefully, who did not let anyone see what she was building until it was ready. She was almost ready. The board meeting was 2 weeks away. Camille had the documents. Lavinia Chambers had certified everything. Eugenia Okafor was aligned. Bernard Tate and Sonia Everett were non-family investors who had put their money into the original company because they believed in what Reginald and Eugenia had built. They were not Marcus's allies. They were the original company's allies, which meant they were hers. She rocked in the chair in the dark nursery. The baby moved once, slow and deep, and then settled. "I know," she said. "I know we're going to be okay. I promise you we are going to be better than okay. But first I have to go through this part. And I am going through it, right now. Tonight. I am going through it." She rocked until the sky outside the east-facing window began to lighten at its edge. The first gray of early morning finding the horizon. She watched it come, then she got up. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table. She opened her laptop. She had a call with Camille at 9 in the morning. She had documents to review. She had a plan to finish building. The darkest part was over. She was still here. Jade Simmons agreed to meet her. That surprised Celeste. She had expected resistance. Expected the specific defensiveness of someone who has been told they are in the right and is not yet ready to examine whether that is true. She had expected to need to press through an attorney to negotiate the meeting itself before they could get to anything that mattered. But Jade Simmons agreed immediately, through Camille's intermediary. No conditions, no counter-proposals, just yes. The meeting was set for a Thursday afternoon at a coffee shop that was not on either of their usual routes. A small place in a neighborhood that belonged to neither of them. Somewhere they could be ordinary women having an ordinary conversation without it meaning anything to anyone who saw them. Celeste arrived first. She ordered tea, still on the decaf protocol, still not entirely forgiving her doctor for it, and she sat at a corner table and she waited. She had not told Vivian about this meeting. She had not told her mother. She had told Camille, who had said that is unusual, and Celeste had said I know, and Camille had said why, and Celeste had thought about it and given her the truest answer she had. Because she deserves to know the truth from me instead of from a court filing, and because I need to look at her and know whether she made a choice or whether she was misled, and because how I treat someone who is not my enemy says something about who I am. And right now, more than anything else, I need to know who I am. Camille had been quiet for a moment. Then she had said, I will reach out to her attorney. Jade Simmons came through the door 4 minutes after the arranged time. 4 minutes was not late. 4 minutes was the amount of time it takes to sit in a parking lot and breathe before you walk into something you're not sure about. She was young, genuinely young in the way that 26 looks when you are 34. the specific brightness of someone who has not yet accumulated the kind of weight that changes how you hold your face. She was wearing a good blazer, the kind you buy when you are trying to be taken seriously in rooms that might not take you seriously. Natural hair worn out, the kind of choice that costs something in certain professional settings, and that Celeste recognized immediately as a woman who had made the same choice and knew what it meant. She sat down. She looked at Celeste's belly. She looked at the table. She folded her hands. And Celeste recognized the gesture. The way her mother had taught her to fold her hands. The way Vivian did it when she was about to say something important. The way Grandma Dot did it before she delivered a piece of wisdom that was going to land whether you were ready for it or not. Somebody's grandmother had taught them both the same thing. "I'm glad you agreed to come," Celeste said. "I almost didn't," Jade said. Her voice was steadier than Celeste had expected. The voice of someone who had made a decision and was committed to it. "I know." They looked at each other across the small table. The coffee shop noise moved around them. The espresso machine. Someone at the counter ordering something complicated. A door opening and closing on the October air. "I need to tell you something," Celeste said. "And I need you to know that I'm not here to hurt you or to blame you. What I'm going to tell you, I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth before it's explained to you by someone else, in a context that will be harder to process." Jade's hands tightened slightly on the table. "Okay," she said. Celeste told her. She told her about the board meeting. She told her briefly, without details that were not necessary, about the shares. About Okafor Family Enterprises. About the fact that Marcus's plan to restructure was going to encounter a complication he was not aware of. She told her what the complication would mean for Marcus's financial and professional situation in the short term. She watched Jade's face as she processed this. It was a face that was working hard to stay even, to not show more than it intended to show. Celeste recognized that effort too. "He told me," Jade said slowly, "that the divorce was already finalized, that it was just a formality, that he had been planning it for." She stopped. She looked at her hands. "He told me you had been separated for over a year." Celeste was quiet. "We weren't separated," Jade said. "It was not a question." "No," Celeste said. Jade pressed her lips together. She was very still. Celeste watched her absorb it. The specific, quiet devastation of understanding that the story you were living was not the story you had been told. The particular grief of realizing you had been handed someone else's script and had performed it faithfully. "I didn't know you were pregnant," Jade said. "He told me. He said there was no pregnancy. He said the rumors were." She stopped again. "I'm 7.5 months pregnant," Celeste said. Jade looked at her belly. She looked away. Something moved through her face. Not the guilt of someone who made a choice with full information. Something more complicated. The grief of someone who understands they have been used, who understands that they believed they were the plan when they were only a part of his plan. A tool mistaken for the blueprint. "I'm sorry," Jade said. And then, quickly, "I know that doesn't help. I know it probably sounds." "It helps a little," Celeste said honestly. "Not much, but a little." A silence. The espresso machine went again. Someone laughed at the counter. October afternoon light came through the windows at a low angle, the particular gold of late afternoon in the fall, landing on the table between them. "What do you want from me?" Jade said. Celeste looked at her. This young woman across the table. Someone's daughter. Someone's possibility. Someone who had been handed a borrowed version of a story and had lived inside it, believing it was the real thing. "Nothing," Celeste said. "I don't want anything from you. I wanted you to know the truth from me instead of from a court filing or a news story or whatever Marcus tells you when things start to change." She paused. "And I wanted to look at you and know whether you were someone who made a choice or someone who was misled." "And," Jade said. She was looking at her directly now, not flinching. "You were misled," Celeste said. "You were given information that was designed to make you comfortable. That's on him, not on you." Jade blinked. She looked at her hands. When she looked up again, her eyes were very bright, but she was not going to cry. Celeste could see the decision being made in real time. The lift of the jaw. The deliberate settling of the shoulders. "He's going to be blindsided at that board meeting," Jade said. "Yes. He's going to look for someone to blame. Probably. It's going to be me," Jade said. There was something in her voice. Not fear. The practical intelligence of someone doing math they do not like the answer to. "He's going to say I should have warned him, that I had access to his schedule, to his correspondence, that if I had been paying attention I could have." "You are not responsible for information you were not given," Celeste said. "You did not know about the shares. You did not know about the holding company. You did not know because those things were structured specifically so that very few people would know. And you were not one of the few people anyone trusted with that information. That is not your failure. That is the structure." Jade nodded slowly. She was thinking. Processing. Celeste could see it happening behind her eyes, the recalibration of a situation she had understood one way and was now understanding another. "Why are you telling me this?" Jade asked. "Really, not the answer you gave your attorney. Why are you here?" Celeste thought about it. She thought about being 23 and believing a powerful man when he looked at her like she was the most interesting person in the room. She thought about the fire escape tomatoes, and the radiator that clanked, and the Sunday dinners, and the version of Marcus Okafor she had fallen in love with, and the version she was divorcing. "Because my grandmother taught me that how you treat someone who is not your enemy says something about who you are," she said, "and I need to know who I am. Right now, coming through this, I very much need to know who I am." They sat with that for a moment. "I have a question," Jade said. "You don't have to answer. Ask. Did you love him? For real? Not for what he was. For who he actually was." Celeste thought about the apartment on 7th Street, the fire escape tomatoes, the second ultrasound where he had cried, the jollof rice and the Sunday dinners and the specific warmth of the early years when everything was still being built. And the building itself was the joy. "For a long time," she said. "Yes. For a long time I really did." Jade nodded. She looked down at her hands once more. Then she looked up. "I'm sorry," she said, "for what my being here cost you." "Build something real," Celeste said. "That's what I want from you. Find someone who tells you true things. Build something real." They did not hug. They shook hands, they walked out of the coffee shop in different directions, and they went back to their separate lives. Celeste sat in her car in the parking lot for 6 minutes after Jade drove away. She did not start the engine. She sat and she looked at her hands on the steering wheel. She thought about who she had been when she walked in. She thought about who she was now. She thought about the specific quiet thing that had happened inside her across the table, from a 26-year-old woman who had folded her hands the same way her grandmother had taught her. Something had changed permanently. Not loudly. Not dramatically. The way things change that are done being anything other than what they are. She was not who she was before she married him. She was also not who she had almost let herself become inside that marriage. She was something else. Something that had been building underneath everything else for 7 years. Invisible, documented, legal, clean. She was ready. She started the car. She drove home. She called Camille from the road. "We're ready," she said. "Tell me where you are," Camille said. 10 days out, Celeste said. "Everything is in order. I just needed to do one more thing first. The meeting. And?" She was misled, Celeste said. "Not a choice, a manipulation." A pause. "Does that change anything for you?" "No," Celeste said. "The plan is the same. But it changed something for me. About what kind of woman I want to be on the other side of this." Camille was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said. "That's good, Celeste." She hung up. She drove. The city moved past her. The Okafor Global Holdings building visible from the interstate. His name in steel letters. A building he had built on a foundation he did not know was hers. 10 days. The night before the board meeting, Celeste could not sleep. She had expected that. She had planned for it the way she planned for everything now. Not by fighting it. By using it. She had set her alarm for 5:30, which meant if she slept, she would sleep. And if she did not sleep, she would not lie in the dark, trying to force something that was not coming. She lay in the bed in the house on Oak Hill Road, and she thought about every step of the sequence that was going to unfold tomorrow. The boardroom of Okafor Family Enterprises. A modest room above the main laundry facility on Industrial Boulevard. Nothing like the glass and steel boardroom in Marcus's tower. A room with a long wooden table that Reginald Sr. had bought at an auction in 1994 and refinished himself. A room with a photograph of the original 3rd Avenue storefront on the wall. The photograph was black and white. Reginald and Eugenia, young in it, standing in front of a single machine, both of them looking at the camera like people who know they are at the beginning of something and are not afraid of the work it will take. She had studied that photograph for years. She knew it the way you know something you have looked at long enough to see past the surface. She thought about the agenda Marcus had submitted, the restructuring proposal, the consolidation plan, the documents that assumed she was not in the room and that the majority shares were still in his parents' names. She thought about Camille's face 3 days ago when she had reviewed the final prepared materials and said, "We are ready." Said it the way she said things when she meant them completely. No hedge, no qualifier. Just "we are ready." She thought about Sterling, who had called 2 days ago and said, "Mom, I know you're doing something. I do not know what it is, but I know you. Good luck." He had said it the way you say it to someone who is about to walk into a room and change everything inside it. Not the good luck of someone hoping for a favorable outcome. The good luck of someone who already knows how it ends. She thought about Rashida, who had called from Howard the night before and said, "Tell me you're going to be okay. Tell me for real." And Celeste had said, "For real, I'm going to be okay." and Rashida had said, "Good, because I need at least one parent who makes sense." At 4 in the morning, she got up. She made tea, the proper kind, loose leaf, the way her grandmother made it, steeped until it was strong enough to mean something. She brought a small pot of water to the right temperature, not boiling, the temperature that lets the leaves open without going bitter. She poured it over the leaves in the glass teapot she had bought at an estate sale 2 years ago, small and clear so you could watch the color deepen as it steeped. She watched it. She breathed. She let the smell of it fill the kitchen. The kitchen on Oak Hill Road at 4 in the morning was very quiet. Outside, the neighborhood was still. A single car passed, slow, its headlights sweeping briefly through the kitchen window and gone. The refrigerator hummed. The teapot sat on the counter. Everything ordinary. Everything present. She carried her tea to the kitchen table. She sat down. She opened her laptop and she went through the documents one more time. Not because she did not know them. She knew them the way she knew her grandmother's recipes. Not by measurement, but by feel, by the weight of what she was holding. She went through them because going through them felt like pressing her hands together before a hard conversation. A centering. A coming home to what she knew. The shares were in order. The documentation of each incremental purchase was complete. 7 years of quarterly purchases. Each one at fair market value. Each one through Simms Legacy Investments, LLC. Each one certified by Lavinia Chambers, who was 70 years old, and had been practicing real estate and corporate law in Birmingham since Celeste was in grade school and who did not make mistakes. She read the certification documents. She read the share transfer agreements. She read the holding company formation papers. She read them not looking for errors, because there were none. She read them because they were hers, because she had made them, because 7 years of quiet, invisible, deliberate work had produced these papers, and she wanted to feel the full weight of that before she walked into a room tomorrow and set them on the table. She had spent 14 years making herself easier to be around so he could be the loudest person in every room. She had made herself smaller so he could feel larger. She had code-switched for his comfort. She had managed his image and his family and his social calendar and his community standing. She had done all of that while also building something of her own, underneath, separately, with her grandmother's name on the company and her grandmother's wisdom in her hands. She was done making herself smaller so someone else could feel large. The sky outside began to change around 5, the absolute dark softening at its edges. Not light yet. The idea of light, the suggestion of it. She closed her laptop. She went to the nursery. She sat in the rocking chair, her grandmother's rocking chair, which she had stripped and restained and resealed herself, which smelled now like the cedar oil she had used and the particular smell of old wood underneath it. She sat in it and she rocked and she breathed. She said a prayer, not the kind you say on your knees, the kind you say sitting up with your eyes open, the kind that is a conversation rather than a performance. She prayed for clarity. She prayed for courage. She prayed for the right words in the right moment. She prayed for her daughter, who was going to arrive in 6 weeks into whatever world Celeste was building for her. She prayed briefly and honestly for Marcus, not for forgiveness. She was not there yet, and she was not going to pretend she was, but for the specific kind of mercy that allows a person to understand what they have done without being entirely destroyed by the understanding. She was not sure he was capable of it, but she prayed for it. Then she got up. She showered. She stood under the water until the bathroom was full of steam and her muscles had released the particular tension of a sleepless night. She washed her hair. She conditioned it. She wrapped it in the towel she had bought specifically because it was big enough to do that properly. Ordinary things, morning things, things that meant the day was beginning. She made herself a real breakfast. Eggs and toast and the last of the sweet tea Vivian had brought over on Saturday. She ate at the kitchen table with the morning news on low in the background, not listening to it, just letting the sound of the world going about its business fill the kitchen while she filled herself with fuel. She dressed in the clothes she had chosen specifically for this day, a deep burgundy wrap dress that accommodated the pregnancy and still read unmistakably as someone who has authority in the room she is entering. Her grandmother's pearls, 2-inch heels that she had tested yesterday afternoon in the kitchen and that she could manage. She looked at herself in the mirror. She looked like herself, not Marcus's wife, not the woman from the gala photographs, not the pregnant woman who had found divorce papers next to prenatal vitamins. She looked like Celeste Simms, who had also become Celeste Simms Okafor, but who had never entirely stopped being the first thing, even in the years when the second thing had crowded out the first. She picked up her bag. She picked up the folder Camille had prepared for her. She picked up her grandmother's pearls where they lay against the collar of the burgundy dress, and she held them for a moment, just held them, feeling the weight of them, cool and specific and real. This is not the end of my story. This is the end of his chapter in it. She walked out of the house on Oak Hill Road. She locked the door behind her. She walked to her car in the early morning, the October air cold and clear, the sky fully light now. Thin clouds, the kind of sky that promises nothing dramatic and delivers the day cleanly. She was ready. She was more than ready. She was going to walk into that boardroom, and she was going to sit at the table she owned 61% of, and she was going to do what she had spent 7 years preparing to do. Quietly, precisely, without drama, without a raised voice, without a scene. She was going to be exactly who she had always been, and it was going to be enough. The hiss and roll of the laundry machines on the floor below was the first thing she heard when she stepped through the door of the Okafor Family Enterprises building on Industrial Boulevard. She had heard that sound 100 times. She had stood on the main floor at 6 in the morning watching the conveyors move and listening to that rhythm and thinking, this is what 46 years sounds like. This is what it means to build something that does not stop. She took the stairs to the second floor. Not the elevator, which was slow and smelled like cleaning chemicals and industrial steam. The stairs. She walked them with the careful gait of a woman who was 8.5 months pregnant and wearing 2-inch heels and had made a deliberate decision about both of those things. Her back ached in the low, specific way that had become the background music of the last 3 weeks. She did not rush. She did not slow down either. The boardroom door was open. Eugenia Okafor was already seated at the head of the table. Celeste stopped in the doorway for one full breath. She took in the room. The long wooden table that Reginald Sr. had bought at an estate auction in 1994. A table with a particular heaviness to it. A table that had held 46 years of decisions. The photograph on the wall behind the head chair, which showed the original 3rd Avenue storefront in 1978. A small brick building with a hand-painted sign and 2 front windows, and Reginald and Eugenia standing in front of it, both of them young, both of them in their good clothes. Both of them looking directly into the camera with the particular expression of people who are standing in front of something they built with their hands and intend to grow with their lives. She had looked at that photograph 100 times. Today it landed differently. Eugenia looked up. She was dressed in the way she always dressed for anything official. A charcoal suit with a white blouse and her pearls, her reading glasses on the fine gold chain around her neck, her posture, the posture of a woman who had not allowed herself to be small in any room in 68 years, and was not starting today. "You look wonderful," Eugenia said. "Thank you, Miss Eugenia," Celeste said. She meant it, and Eugenia received it as the complicated thing it was. Camille Davenport was already at the side table, setting up her materials with the precise economy of a woman who has been in many boardrooms, and has never once been the least prepared person in any of them. She looked up at Celeste and nodded once. That nod carried everything. "We are ready. You are ready. Let us go." Celeste set her bag on the chair she had chosen. The chair to Eugenia's right, the chair that was not the head but was the one that said, "I am beside the thing that matters most in this room. I am beside the foundation." The non-family investors arrived together, which was not accidental. Bernard Tate was 64 years old, heavy-set and gray at the temples, a man whose family had been in Birmingham business since the 1950s, a man who did not arrive at anything without having thought it through entirely first. He shook Celeste's hand with both of his and he said nothing, which with Bernard Tate meant considerably more than words. Sonia Everett was 51, angular and watchful, her natural hair cut close, her suit a deep navy that read as someone who made aesthetic choices with the same precision she brought to financial ones. She looked at Celeste with the careful attention of a woman who is adjusting a calculation she has been running in her head. "Good morning," Celeste said to both of them. "Good morning," Sonia Everett said. Bernard Tate nodded. He took his seat. The room filled with the specific quiet of a space where significant things are about to happen. The laundry machines below continued their work, hissing and rolling. The photograph watched from the wall. Marcus arrived at 9:58. She heard him before she saw him. His footsteps on the stairs had a particular quality she had been listening to for 14 years. She knew the difference between his board meeting walk and his casual walk, between the walk that meant he was comfortable and the walk that meant he was performing comfort. This was the second kind. Deliberate. Contained. The walk of a man who has decided how the next 2 hours are going to go and is moving toward what he believes is a foregone conclusion. He came through the door with Cornelius Hargrove beside him, silver-haired and measured, the kind of man who fills a room without announcing himself. 2 younger associates followed with portfolios and the careful attention of people who know they are here to observe and not to speak. Marcus was wearing the charcoal suit she had not helped him choose. He was carrying the leather portfolio that meant he had a presentation ready. He was looking at the head of the table first, the way he always looked at the head of any table, and then he saw his mother sitting there. He stopped moving. His eyes went from Eugenia to Celeste. The fraction of a second in which his face did the work of processing, something that did not architecture of what he had prepared, was small. She had been watching his face for 14 years, and she did not miss it. Celeste, he said. Marcus, she said. I wasn't expecting. He stopped. He started again. I didn't know you'd be here. I know, she said. He looked at Camille, who was watching him with the expression she had worn in every deposition Celeste had ever heard described by people on the other side of her. Professionally warm, completely alert, entirely unafraid. He looked at his own attorney, who was reading something on the papers in front of him, with the careful composure of a man who has just noticed a structural problem in a building he has been commissioned to renovate. Marcus looked at his mother. Mother. His voice was controlled, but underneath it was the specific note of a man who has arrived somewhere he believed was his territory and has found the terrain has changed. What is this? Sit down, Marcus, Eugenia said. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. She had been his mother for 42 years, and she knew exactly how much weight those 3 words could carry, and she put all of it behind them. He sat down. Camille stood. She had a voice designed for rooms like this, clear and low and utterly authoritative, the voice of a woman who has never needed to shout because she has always been the most prepared person in the conversation. Before we proceed to the agenda as submitted, Camille said, there is a preliminary matter regarding the ownership structure of Okafor Family Enterprises that requires the board's attention. She moved from the side table to the main table and placed a tabbed document packet in front of each person seated there with the efficiency of someone who has rehearsed this movement. These materials document the transfer of controlling interest in Okafor Family Enterprises from Reginald and Eugenia Okafor to Simms Legacy Investments Limited Liability Company over the period of 7 years. Each transfer was conducted at fair market value, properly documented and certified by Lavinia Chambers, Esquire, who has practiced corporate law in this city for 40 years and has never, in that time, made a clerical error. The room was very still. The laundry machines continued below. The photograph watched. Marcus opened his packet. He was very deliberate about it, the way he was deliberate about everything in boardrooms, reading with the contained focus of a man who is gathering information before he reacts. He read the first page. He turned to the second. His jaw worked once. He turned to the third. Cornelius Hargrove was reading beside him, his face doing the specific work of a man who has just discovered that the building he was hired to renovate has an entirely different floor plan than the one on the blueprints he was given. Marcus looked up. He looked at his mother first. You sold them to her. We sold them to her, Eugenia said, your father and I, over 7 years. Incrementally, legally. With full understanding of what we were doing and why. She held his gaze without flinching. And we would do it again. He looked at Celeste. She had prepared for this moment. She had prepared for anger, for the controlled fury of a man who has just discovered that the room he walked into is not the room he thought it was. She had prepared for legal objections, for Cornelius Hargrove's quiet recalibrations, for the specific discomfort of Bernard Tate and Sonia Everett watching a family arrangement become visible in a professional space. She had not prepared for what was actually on his face. It was not rage. It was something more complicated, and in a way more honest. It was recognition, the specific recognition of a man who has just seen for the first time the full shape of what he had been looking at for years without understanding it. The look of someone who has been standing at a distance from a painting he thought he knew and has just stepped close enough to see the actual brushwork. He was seeing her, the full version. The version that had been operating alongside his life and his company and his decisions for 7 years, quietly, legally, in rooms he never entered, through channels he never monitored. He was seeing all of it. She let him look. 61%, he said. Yes, she said, you own 61% of this company. I do. He set the papers down. He breathed. The breathing was careful and deliberate, the kind of breathing a person does when they are holding something large and deciding how to set it down without causing additional damage. This changes the restructuring proposal, Cornelius Hargrove said quietly, not to Marcus directly, to the room, with the calm of a man who is updating his understanding of the terrain in real time. Yes, Marcus said, it does. Celeste remained standing. She had not planned to precisely, but she had been sitting since 7 in the morning, and her back and her daughter both had opinions about that, and she was not going to apologize for standing in a room she owned the majority of. She looked at the people seated at the table. Bernard Tate, who was watching her with the steady attention of a man who has invested his money in something and is now watching someone else decide its future. Sonia Everett, who had the particular alertness of a woman who came to this room having done the math and is now adding a new variable. Eugenia, who was watching her son with the complicated love of a mother who has made a hard choice and is not regretting it but is not entirely above the grief of what it cost. She had not prepared a speech. She had prepared a statement. Those were different things. "I want to address the board directly," she said. She let her voice be what it was, clear and steady, and without the particular effort of someone performing steadiness. It was simply steady. It had been steady since 4 in the morning when she had made her tea and gone through the documents one final time. "I am not here to restructure. I am not here to consolidate the original company into a holding structure where its assets can be leveraged for decisions I have no voice in. I am here to do what I have been doing for the last 7 years, which is to protect the foundation." She paused. She let that word land. Foundation. Okafor Family Enterprises has 47 employees, she continued. Many of them have been with this company for more than a decade, some of them longer. It has commercial laundry contracts with 6 hospitals, 4 hotel groups, and 3 university dining services in 4 states. It has a credit history and a community reputation that was built over 46 years by Reginald and Eugenia Okafor, and that history has served as the foundational asset of this family's presence in Birmingham. She looked at Marcus directly. That foundation is not a restructuring opportunity. It is a responsibility. Marcus was watching her with the expression of a man who is listening for the first time. She did not soften, she did not sharpen. She let it be true and she let him hear it. "I own 61% of this company," she said. "I am not liquidating it. I am not merging it. It will continue to operate as it has always operated, serve the community it has always served, and employ the people it has always employed. The 3 open management positions will be filled by the beginning of the new year. The expansion conversations with the Tuscaloosa University system will continue." She paused. "That is my proposal. The vote, of course, is a formality." Nobody spoke. The laundry machines hissed below. The photograph held its gaze from the 1978 wall. Bernard Tate cleared his throat. He was the kind of man who cleared his throat before saying something he had already decided. A man for whom the pause was not deliberation but ceremonial. The courtliness of someone who understood that significant things deserved a moment before they were made official. "I vote with the majority shareholder," he said. Sonia Everett said same. Eugenia said obviously. The vote was recorded. Camille documented it. The room held the particular quality of a place where something has just been permanently decided. Marcus had not moved through any of it. He was still. Cornelius Hargrove leaned toward him and said something quietly in his ear. Marcus nodded once. Not at his attorney. At something internal. Something he was settling with himself. He looked at the table. He looked at the photograph on the wall. He looked at it for a long time, actually looked at it. The way people rarely look at photographs they have seen every time they enter a room. The 1978 storefront. The hand-painted sign. His parents in their good clothes, young and certain, and building something. When he looked back at Celeste, his voice was quieter than she had expected. Not defeated, something else. Something more honest than most of the voices she had heard from him in recent months. "The holdings company," he said. "You're not asking for any part of it." "No," she said. "Why?" She thought about how to answer. She thought about what was true. "Because you built that. Those are your decisions and your consequences and your future. I was never the architect of Okafor Global Holdings. I was the person who made the architecture possible by keeping everything underneath it stable." She looked at him steadily. "I would like to keep what I built." "You can keep what you built. The children belong to both of us. Everything else we negotiate through Camille and Cornelius." He was quiet for a moment. "The original company," he said. "You've been protecting it." "Yes. From me." She thought about how to answer that honestly. "From decisions that would have used it as a resource rather than treated it as a legacy," she said. "That is not the same thing as from you." He received that. She could see him receiving it, placing it somewhere, examining it. It was the most honest conversation they had had in years, and it was happening in a boardroom with 2 attorneys and 2 investors present, and 47 employees' livelihoods on the table, and her pregnancy making itself known in the low ache of her back and the slow press of her daughter against her ribs. This was their marriage, finally, fully visible. All its truth, all its architecture. "My attorneys will review the documentation," he said. "Of course," Camille said. "We anticipate no concerns." He stood. His associates gathered their papers with the quiet efficiency of people who have been trained to know when a meeting is genuinely over. Cornelius Hargrove shook Celeste's hand, which surprised her, and she shook it back, because she had learned from her grandmother that how you receive things matters as much as how you give them. Marcus walked to the door. He stopped at the threshold the way people stop at the end of things. He turned around. He was still looking at her with that recognition, that honest, complicated look that was the most real she had seen him be in a long time. "I didn't know," he said, "about any of this." "I know you didn't," she said. "My mother." He did not finish the sentence. "Your mother made choices about her own company," Celeste said. "Those choices are not mine to explain to you." He was quiet. He looked at her belly. He looked at the place where his daughter was waiting. "The baby," he said. "I want to be present for the birth, if you'll allow it." She thought about Dorothy Celeste, who was going to need a father, not a perfect father, not the husband who had filed divorce papers next to prenatal vitamins, a father, accountable, present, imperfect, trying. "We will discuss it," she said, through Camille. "We will discuss all of it through Camille." He nodded. He left. She stood in the boardroom of Okafor Family Enterprises, and she listened to his footsteps going down the stairs. She listened to them until they were past the main floor, past the laundry machines, out to the parking lot. She listened until the sound of his car starting reached her through the second-floor window and then faded. She breathed. Eugenia said from across the table, "Well done." "Thank you," Celeste said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. She cleared it. "Thank you for trusting me 7 years ago. For all of it." Eugenia looked at her. She looked at the pregnancy and the pearls and her granddaughter's namesake standing in the room that was now hers to steward. Something moved through her face that was enormous and contained and would not allow itself to be made small by its surroundings. "There was never anyone else to trust with this," she said. "Not with this." The laundry machines hissed below. The photograph held the 1978 morning on the wall. Celeste pressed her hand to the small of her back and she breathed, and she stood in the foundation she had protected, and she did not look down. She had not come here to be small. She had never come here to be small. That part was over. That part was done. The community found out the way truth always finds its way through Birmingham, not in an announcement, not in a statement, not in a press release, but in the way a tide comes in. First at the edges, quiet and unremarkable, and then all at once and everywhere. It started at the salon. Vivian had held her tongue for 7 years and 2 weeks, which was exactly 2 weeks longer than she had promised and which she had managed through a discipline that was costing her in sleep and in tension and in the very real medical opinion of her dentist that she was, grinding her back molars down to something concerning. On the Monday after the board meeting, she walked into her salon at 7 in the morning and she sat down in the chair across from Keisha Thornton, who was setting up her station for the day, and she said, "Keisha, it's time." Keisha Thornton looked at her with the expression of a woman who has been sitting on a coal for 8 months and has been waiting for permission to put it down. "Lord have mercy," Keisha said. "Yes," Vivian said. "He should." Keisha Thornton had a cousin who worked in the Okafor Global Holdings building and a church network that covered 4 congregations and a text message speed that Celeste had once, privately, described as faster than the actual news. By Tuesday evening, the information had moved. Not all of it. Not the precise financial details, which Camille had structured with enough care that the legal specifics would remain Celeste to disclose or not disclose as she chose, but the shape of it, the outline, that Celeste had not walked away with nothing, that Celeste had never been working with nothing to begin with, that the board meeting had happened and that Marcus had walked in expecting one thing and had walked out understanding another. The response from the community came in stages. First came the professional calls. The women from the Birmingham chapter of the National Association of Black Business Professionals, where Celeste had served as treasurer for 6 years while Marcus sat on the founding board. The nonprofit board members she had served alongside on 3 separate organizations over 11 years. The cautious and carefully worded calls from people who had their own histories with Marcus's management style and who were quietly adjusting the calculations they had been running about who in that marriage had actually known what. These calls were supportive and somewhat careful. The particular caution of a professional community that is recalibrating its alliances and does not yet know how far things are going to go. Then came the personal calls. Candace Whitfield called on Wednesday morning. Celeste was in the sunroom of the house on Oak Hill Road with her feet elevated, which her daughter had been asking her to do for 2 weeks, and which she had finally conceded to, and she picked up on the second ring. "Celeste," Candace said. Her voice was the voice of a woman who has been praying for something and has just received an answer she did not fully anticipate. "I am so sorry I did not do more sooner. I am sorry I did not say more to you. I felt it for weeks and I said nothing, and that is something I am going to carry for a while." "Candace," Celeste said, "you texted me at 7 in the morning on the worst morning. You prayed for me when you did not even know why. That counted. That really counted. A silence on the line, warm and full. He is a fool, Candace said quietly with the measured certainty of a pastor's wife who does not say things she does not mean, a gifted, accomplished, significant fool. Yes, Celeste agreed. He is. What do you need? I need the foundation gala to happen, Celeste said. I need it to be good. I need the work it funds to continue. Because the work is real and I am not going to let it become a casualty of any of this. Then it will happen, Candace said. Tell me what you need and I will bring 3 women. She brought 5. And Marvella Williams. Marvella Williams was 64 years old, Deacon Williams's wife, a woman who had been sitting on what she knew for months and who was not proud of how long she had sat there. She called Celeste on Thursday, and her voice had the specific quality of a woman who has been rehearsing an apology and has finally gathered herself to deliver it. Celeste, I am going to say this plainly, Marvella said. I knew something was wrong for a long time. I didn't say it. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself maybe I was wrong. I told myself a lot of things. She paused. I was not wrong, and it was my business. And I am sorry. Celeste was quiet for a moment. She thought about what her grandmother had told her. I am not saying you have to forgive on a schedule, baby. I am saying that carrying it costs you more than it costs them. You do not have to be generous. You just have to be free. Marvella, she said. What do you do when you want to make something right? I show up, Marvella said. That's what I know how to do. I show up. Then show up, Celeste said. Candace Whitfield is organizing the gala planning committee. Come and bring your sweet potato pound cake and whatever else you've been holding. There is work to do. Marvella Williams showed up the following Saturday with the pound cake and 3 women from the Thursday night Bible study and a determination that was formidable in its specificity. The Birmingham Business Journal story ran on Friday. Someone had talked, Bernard Tate most likely, who had never been constitutionally capable of sitting on significant business news for more than 72 hours. The piece was careful, the reporter clearly operating with partial information and a legal team's awareness of what could and could not be said. But it was enough. Celeste Okafor, majority shareholder of Okafor Family Enterprises. Board meeting held. Restructuring proposal defeated. Company preserved. The story did not use the word divorce. It did not need to. The community could read around the edges of the things that were not said, and the picture that emerged when you read the edges was clear enough. Her phone did not stop for 2 days. Lorraine Simms called at 7 in the morning on Saturday because 7 in the morning was when she called about the things that mattered most. Celeste was making coffee, real coffee, the kind her grandmother taught her to make, and she answered on the second ring. Are you safe, Lorraine said. Are you and the baby safe? Not what happened. Not tell me everything. Not I knew something was wrong. Just, are you safe? Yes, Mama, Celeste said. We're safe. Her mother breathed, the exhale of a woman who has been holding something and has just been told she can set it down. Then everything else, Lorraine said, we can deal with. Then she cried. Brief and private, the particular crying of a woman who has been keeping her face composed for weeks and has just been given permission to set it down for a moment. Celeste heard it through the phone. She held the phone and she said nothing, and she let her mother have the moment, because her mother had been carrying this too, in the dignified and terrible way that Black mothers carry their children's pain, quietly, without being asked, without acknowledgement, for as long as it takes. Mama, Celeste said when her mother had finished. He's going to be okay. The baby's going to be fine. Sterling's here with me. Everything is going to be okay. I know, Lorraine said. I have always known you would be okay. I just needed to hear it. Reverend Whitfield called on the following Monday. He asked to meet, not at the church, which was wise of him, because the church was too visible, and what they needed to say to each other was not yet ready for visibility. They met at a restaurant near his house, a small place with booths and a breakfast menu, and the specific quietness of a Tuesday morning when the rush has passed. He was 62 years old, and he was carrying more weight than he usually carried. She could see it in his posture, the slight forward tilt of a man who has been bowing under something and has not yet straightened himself fully. I owe you an honest conversation, he said. Yes, she said, you do. She did not soften it. She was not angry at him, not in the consuming way, but she owed him and herself the truth, which was that he had known something and had said nothing, and she was sitting across from him at 8 weeks before her due date, with a divorce proceeding underway, and she deserved his full honesty. He gave it to her. He told her what he had suspected, and when he had suspected it and what he had prayed about, and the specific place where he had let community politics override his pastoral obligation. He was a man who knew the difference between confession and justification, and he stuck to confession. Celeste respected that. What do you need from me, he said when he was finished. When your congregation looks to you for understanding about what happened, she said, I need you to be clear that what Marcus did was wrong. I need you to be clear that I was wronged. Not a condemnation, not a public shaming, just a clear pastoral statement that the woman he married was treated without dignity, and that she did not disappear, she met his eyes. I need people to know that I am still standing, and I need them to hear it from the pulpit, because the pulpit is where things become real in this community. Reverend Whitfield was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I can do that. Thank you, she said. The following Sunday, 1 Corinthians Baptist Church gathered as it always gathered, in the specific warmth and weight of a congregation that has been meeting in the same building for 87 years. Celeste was there. She had considered not coming, had considered that the visibility of it was too much, that the eyes would be too many, that she was not ready to be looked at by 200 people who were all in the middle of adjusting what they knew about her life. She went anyway, because her grandmother had told her, never disappear, not when it hurts, not when you are afraid. The disappearing is what they count on. Stay visible. Be yourself in every room, let them look. She was 8.5 months pregnant, and she wore the deep burgundy dress and her grandmother's pearls, and she walked into 1 Corinthians Baptist Church, and she sat in the pew she had sat in for 11 years, the third from the front on the left side, and she held her head up. Reverend Whitfield preached a sermon on integrity. He called no names. He needed to call no names. He spoke about what it means to make vows in the presence of a community, and what it means when those vows are broken, and what the community owes to the one who kept them. He spoke about dignity specifically, and about what the body of the church owes to the dignity of its members. He was careful, and he was honest, and he was clear. The congregation heard him. She watched them hear him. The particular settled stillness that came over the room when a congregation receives a truth they have been waiting for but did not know how to name. After service, in the parking lot, 7 women formed a circle around her. Not quickly, not with announcement. One and then another, until there were 7 women standing with her in the October sun, the parking lot around them, full of people moving toward their cars. They did not say very much. They said things like, I see you. I am glad you are here. We have been praying. We are not going anywhere. They stood there. Celeste stood in the center of that circle, and she felt the weight of 11 years and 14 months and 7 months of pregnancy, and the board meeting, and Camille's office, and the green dress, and the prenatal vitamins, and the envelope on the kitchen island. She felt all of it, and she also felt these 7 women standing around her in the October sun, and she felt the specific truth of a community coming to where it should have been earlier but arriving nonetheless, and she breathed. This was not weakness. This was not needing rescue. This was belonging. This was the community doing what community exists to do, which is to witness the people inside it and to stand beside them when they are standing and to stand around them when they need standing around. This was 1 Corinthians Baptist Church in Birmingham doing what it had done for 87 years. She stood in the parking lot, and she let herself be witnessed. She let herself be seen. She did not perform strength. She did not perform composure. She was simply Celeste Simms, and she was standing, and she was not alone. And for right now, that was enough. That was, for right now, more than enough. I do not need to be rescued, she thought quietly. Certainly, the thought settling into her bones the way knowledge settles when it has finally stopped moving and found its place. I have always been the one who does the standing. I am still standing. They have just finally come to stand with me. She looked up. The October sun was warm on her face. She pressed her hand against her belly, where Dorothy Celeste was rolling slow and easy, the particular afternoon roll that had become familiar as breathing. I know, Celeste said quietly, to her daughter. I see it too. She arrived on a Tuesday. Not because Celeste had planned it for a Tuesday, and not because the doctors had said Tuesday specifically, but because Dorothy Celeste Okafor had her own sense of timing and had decided that 6 weeks after the board meeting and 3 weeks after the 1 Corinthians parking lot was the right moment. She arrived at 7:42 in the morning, which was early in the way that meaningful things are often early, arriving before you have finished preparing, arriving into the specific morning quiet before the day has gotten loud. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. A full head of hair, dark and soft and already asserting its own direction, which Celeste noted with the particular recognition of a woman who had spent 34 years asserting the direction of her own hair and who understood that this was, in the most literal possible way, generational. The room was the kind of room that rooms like this always are. The smell of antiseptic and something warmer underneath it. The monitors and their sounds, steady and reassuring. The window that showed a November Birmingham morning, gray and cool, and carrying the specific quality of a city that knows how to keep going regardless of what the weather decides. Vivian was in the room. She had been in the room for 4 hours before the baby came, and she had said the things that sisters say, and she had held Celeste's hand during the hard parts, and she had been exactly what she always was, which was the person who showed up before she was asked and stayed past the point where most people would have left. When Dorothy Celeste arrived, Vivian made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, but somewhere in the honest space between them, and she pressed her hands over her mouth, and she did not say anything for a long time. She did not need to. Celeste knew. Their mother arrived 11 minutes after the birth. Lorraine Simms, 62 years old, who had taught 8th grade English for 30 years, and who had raised 2 daughters without flinching, and who had been sitting in that waiting room for 6 hours with her Bible and her quiet, and the particular endurance of a woman who knows how to wait, because she has always had to wait, came through the door and looked at Celeste and looked at the baby and cried without embarrassment for 10 full minutes. Not delicate crying, not composed crying. Lorraine Simms cried the way she had always told her daughters they were allowed to cry, which was fully and honestly and without apology, because feelings were not weakness, and anyone who told you otherwise had confused vulnerability with defeat. When she finished, she wiped her face with the tissues she had brought because she had known she would need them, and she leaned over and kissed Celeste's forehead, and she said, "You did so good. You did so, so good." Celeste pressed her free hand to her mother's face, and she said, "We did." Grandma Dot was in the waiting room. She had said, with the characteristic economy of language that had always made her authority so complete, "I will wait outside. Waiting rooms are for waiting, and I am not too old to know my place." "Tell me when she is here," she was told. She came. She moved across the room with the careful steadiness of 78 years, each step deliberate, nothing hurried, the walk of a woman who has learned that the things worth moving toward do not require running toward. She came to the side of the bed. She looked at the baby in Celeste's arms. She was quiet for a long time. The room held that quiet. Lorraine was quiet. Vivian was quiet. The monitors beeped their steady beep. Outside, November Birmingham went on doing what it did. "Dorothy Celeste," Grandma Dot said. "Dorothy Celeste," Celeste confirmed. Her grandmother reached out one hand. She touched the baby's cheek with the very tip of her index finger, so gently, so carefully, with the full understanding of a woman who knows that some things are irreplaceable and must be handled accordingly. She held that touch for a moment. Then she sat back in the chair. "She has your cheekbones," she said. "She has yours," Celeste said. "Same thing," her grandmother said. Something moved through Dorothy Mae Simms's face. Enormous. Private. The specific contained emotion of a woman who has lived 78 years in Birmingham, Alabama, who was born 4 blocks from the 16th Street Baptist Church in 1948, who has buried people she loved, and raised people she loved, and made biscuits and prayers and decisions, and kept her dignity through things that would have broken people who did not have her particular kind of roots. The emotion of a woman who has watched something come full circle and has lived long enough to see it. "You did well," she said, "all of it. Everything. You did well." Celeste looked at her grandmother. She thought about the conversation on the Elm Hill porch in October, about biscuits made by Phil, about the front porch and the coffee and the morning light. She thought about, "I did not raise you to be anybody's decoration. Get up." She thought about, "Always have somewhere to go. Always have something that is yours." She thought, "She built me for exactly this." "Thank you, Grandma," she said, "for all of it." Her grandmother patted her knee once. Simple. Final. The gesture of a woman who has said what needs saying and knows it has landed. Marcus had been in the hospital. They had worked it out through Camille and Cornelius. Because working things out through Camille and Cornelius was the way that she and Marcus were going to manage their shared life from now on, through the structure of people who were paid to be precise and clear and who did not carry the history of the thing in their bodies the way she and Marcus did. He had come. He had been in the waiting room with Sterling. Sterling, who was 16 years old and had driven himself with his learner's permit and a level of quiet determination that nobody had thought to argue with, because he was Celeste's son and he had decided that he was going to be there, and that was the end of the discussion. He had been in the waiting room with his father, which Celeste understood was its own kind of complicated, and she was grateful for the image of her son sitting beside the man who had hurt her, not forgiving what had been done but not cutting off what remained, understanding at 16 the difference between the person and the action in a way that many adults spent lifetimes failing to learn. Sterling came in after Lorraine had been there a while, after the room had settled into its particular warmth. He came to the side of the bed and he looked at his sister for the first time, and his face did what 16-year-old faces do when they encounter something they were not fully prepared for. He was trying very hard not to be obviously emotional. He was not succeeding. "She's small," he said. "She'll grow," Celeste said. He started again. "She's really pretty, Mom." "She is," Celeste agreed. He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb anything, the carefulness of a boy who has learned to be gentle with things that matter. He looked at the baby. He looked at his mother. He reached out one hand and touched his sister's hand, which was smaller than his smallest finger, which closed around his finger with the reflexive grip of new life, claiming whatever it can reach. His face opened. "Hi," he said to her. "Quiet. Just between them. I'm your big brother. I'm going to teach you everything important." Celeste pressed her lips together. She looked at her son and she felt the specific love of a mother who has been strong for so long and has just been given permission, in this room, to simply feel it without needing to do anything about it. Rashida appeared in the doorway. She had flown in from Howard University in Washington, D.C. the night before on a red-eye that she had booked the moment Celeste had called with the timeline, arriving with a bag she had packed in 20 minutes and the particular energy of a young woman who does not wait for things to come to her. She was 19 years old and she was studying pre-law, and she was in the specific way of Celeste's stepdaughter, entirely herself in every room she entered, which meant she entered this one at full Rashida, fully present, fully feeling. She looked at the baby in Celeste's arms and her face went completely open. Not the composed Rashida who cross-examined her professors and sent 12-point memoranda to her academic advisor about curriculum gaps in the civil rights law track. Not the strategic Rashida who had called Celeste from D.C. every week since October to check in with the precision of someone running a monitoring operation. Just Rashida, 19 and feeling it. "Dorothy," she said. She came to the other side of the bed. She leaned close. "Hi, Dorothy." She looked at her sister for a long time. "I'm your big sister," she said. "I'm going to teach you everything important. Starting with, never let anyone tell you what you're worth. Starting with, you were born knowing." Celeste looked at this girl she had helped raise. She looked at Rashida's face, completely open, completely present, and she thought this is what you protect. This specific, particular, irreplaceable thing. This is why. This is what it costs, and this is what it is worth, and there is no calculation in which the cost is greater than what you receive. Later, when the visitors had cycled through and the room had grown quiet, when Vivian was asleep in the corner chair and Lorraine had gone to bring back dinner from the restaurant down the street because she could not be in a room without doing something useful, and feeding people was what she knew, Celeste was alone with her sleeping daughter. She looked at Dorothy Celeste in the bassinet. Perfect and entirely new, and at the same time entirely known, the way a face can be both of those things at once. Her phone was on the bed beside her. She picked it up. She read through the messages that had come in during labor, because during labor she had been otherwise occupied and her phone had been in Vivian's bag. From Camille. From Eugenia, who had sent, "She is here. She is already ours. Rest. Daughter." From Bernard Tate. From Sonia Everett. From the women of 1 Corinthians. From her mother's sister in Atlanta. From Rashida's godmother. And from a number she almost did not recognize. 4 words: "Congratulations, she is lucky." It was signed with a J. She looked at that text for a moment. She thought about a coffee shop and a young woman's folded hands and the specific courage it took to send 4 words when there was nothing else to say and nothing else that needed saying. She closed her phone. She looked at her daughter. She thought, "What I heal in myself I do not pass down. The story I tell myself about who I am matters more than the story he told about me. The dignity I carry out of this situation is the first thing I leave her. Before anything else. Before the company, before the house, before the money in the accounts he never had access to, before the Simms Collective and the Gala and the Tuscaloosa contract. The dignity. That is the first inheritance. I was not who he married me to be, and she will never be anyone's version of herself but her own." She rested. The November morning outside the window held its gray quiet. Dorothy Celeste slept in the bassinet. Celeste Simms, who had also been Celeste Simms Okafor, and was not going to be much longer, lay in the warm room with her daughter breathing beside her, and she was, for the first time in a long time, not preparing for anything. She was just there. She was just where she was. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. 3 months after Dorothy Celeste was born, the house on Oak Hill Road smelled like cedar and baby, and the specific warmth of a home that is being lived in by people who have decided it is theirs. Celeste had renovated it. Not dramatically, because she had always distrusted dramatic renovation, the kind that erases what came before in order to announce what has arrived. She had opened it up a little, taken out the wall between the dining room and the sitting room to let the afternoon light reach all the way through. She had replaced the kitchen counters with something warmer soapstone that felt like a decision rather than a default. She had added a sunroom off the back of the house where the afternoon came in at an angle that was, as she had suspected when she imagined it, exactly right. The nursery had the east-facing window. Dorothy Celeste, who was 3 months old and already opinionated about the direction of things, was thriving in it. Sterling had moved in. He had sat his father down and told him, with the direct and gentle honesty that was entirely his own, that he wanted to live primarily with his mother. He had said it in a way that was not an accusation and was not a wound, just a statement of where he needed to be, and Marcus, who understood his son even through the complicated wreckage of the choices he had made, had not argued. This was not a rejection. This was a 16-year-old knowing himself. Marcus could honor that even when it cost him something. Sterling had unpacked his things into the bedroom with the north-facing window, which he said had better light for studying and which was true, and he had put his speakers in the corner and his books on the shelves, and within 2 weeks the room smelled like him, like the particular combination of clean laundry and whatever body wash he used, and the specific smell that was simply Sterling, and the house on Oak Hill Road was a home in the full sense of the word. Rashida flew in every month. She had decided that Howard University was exactly the right place for her, and she was not going to change that for anything, not even for her sister, which Dorothy Celeste would understand when she was older, and Rashida would explain it to her directly, because that was how Rashida did things. But once a month she came. She arrived each time with a bag full of things she had read about infant development and strong opinions about everything, and the specific love of a firstborn child for the smallest thing in the family, which is a love with no reservation and no calculation and no complicated history attached to it. She would sit in the sunroom for hours. She talked to Dorothy Celeste about the world as if she were explaining it to someone who was about to need the information urgently, which was, in a way, exactly true. She told her about case law and about Birmingham history and about the women in their family and about Howard University's campus in October and about the proper way to argue a point and the improper way to yield one. Dorothy Celeste listened with the focused attention of someone who has not yet learned to pretend she is not paying attention. Celeste watched them together and thought, this is what a family looks like when it has survived something. Not the same shape it was before, a different shape, one that fits the people inside it. The divorce had moved through its necessary stages with the deliberate pace of 2 excellent attorneys navigating complex terrain. Camille and Cornelius were both too good at their work to be anything other than thorough, which meant slow, which meant that there were still documents being reviewed and positions being negotiated and details being settled. But the broad outlines were clear, because Celeste had been clear about them from the beginning, and Marcus, once he had understood the full picture of what she held and what she was prepared to do with it, had stopped being combative and had become, if not cooperative, then at least honest. The holdings company was his. She had never wanted it. Okafor Global Holdings was his vision and his construction and his future to manage and his consequences to own, and she had never once looked at that glass tower with his name in steel letters and thought, I want that. She had thought, I helped make that possible. She had thought, the foundation that made that possible is mine to protect. She had thought, those are 2 different things and I know the difference between them. The children belonged to both of them. Sterling would live primarily with her. Dorothy Celeste would live primarily with her. Marcus would have regular and genuine presence in their lives. Not because she was generous, but because she had decided a long time ago that the opposite of what he had done to her was not withholding her children from their father. The opposite of what he had done to her was showing them what it looked like to make decisions based on what the children needed rather than what she felt. Everything else was being negotiated. Fairly, through the attorneys. She was not asking for things she had not built. She was asking for everything she had built, precisely, and for the right to be done being Celeste Okafor and to be Celeste Simms again, which was a different kind of reclamation than the financial one, but not a less important one. Okafor Family Enterprises was in the best condition it had been in 7 years. Imani Washington had started as general manager in December, which was 3 weeks after the board meeting and 6 weeks before Dorothy Celeste arrived. She was 42 years old, and she had spent 12 years managing hospitality operations for a national hotel chain, which meant she understood commercial laundry from the receiving end, from the side of the hotels and hospitals and university dining services who depended on having their linens and uniforms and tablecloths returned on time and correctly, which was a perspective the original management had been missing, and which had led to 3 contract losses in the previous 2 years that had troubled Celeste long before she had the authority to address them. Imani listened before she acted. This was rarer than it should have been, and Celeste had identified it as the quality she needed most. Imani spent the first 6 weeks walking the floor, sitting with the drivers, learning the routes, understanding the equipment. She sat in the loading dock at 5 in the morning. She sat in the folding room on a Saturday. She attended 2 union meetings and 3 team leads meetings and 3 meetings with the long-term managers who had been doing this work since Reginald Sr. was still coming in every day and who were watching the new general manager with the careful attention of people who have watched several iterations of change come through and have developed opinions about which kinds last. After 6 weeks, Imani and Celeste sat down together and Imani laid out what she had found and what she proposed. It was specific and it was precise, and it was built on things she had actually seen rather than assumptions she had brought with her. 3 small changes. Not dramatic. Not a restructuring. 3 targeted adjustments to routing schedules, 2 equipment maintenance protocols, and 1 staffing shift that had been an open conversation for 3 years but had never been properly resolved. 11% reduction in operational costs. 1 new hospital contract. The first new contract in 2 years. It was not glamorous. It was not a glass tower with a name in steel letters. It was exactly what it had always been. A foundation. And she was building on it. The Simms Collective was not yet public. She was not ready to announce it, and she had learned the hard way the difference between being ready and performing readiness, and she was not going to perform anything she did not feel. But the registration was filed. The initial investment was in place, a portion of the proceeds from the share purchases that had been sitting in her accounts, waiting for the shape that was right for them. She had identified 3 potential first investments, all of them women-owned businesses in Birmingham, all of them in the specific stage between proof of concept and scaling that was the hardest stage and the stage where the most businesses failed for lack of capital and support rather than for lack of viability. She had 1 conversation scheduled for January. A woman who had been running a natural beauty supply company out of her garage for 4 years and had a waiting list that stretched past 6 months. A woman who had sent Celeste a message through a mutual contact that said simply, "I have a business. I have been told you might be someone worth knowing." Celeste had written back, "Yes, let's talk." Small, the beginning of something. She had learned from Okafor Family Enterprises that all foundations are small at the start. 1 machine in a storefront on 3rd Avenue. 1 conversation in a coffee shop. 1 woman deciding. Camille had said to her, over dinner in November, the dinner that was not a celebration exactly, but was the kind of meal that becomes a celebration simply by being eaten in the right company, "What do you want to build next?" And Celeste had looked across the table at the woman who had been her attorney and her friend and her witness, and she had said something of my own, on my own terms, for my children and their children and the women who come after all of us. Camille had raised her glass. Celeste had raised hers. They had drunk to it, to the specific, enormous, ordinary thing of a woman who has survived something and has decided it's on the other side of it, not to contract, not to protect, not to play small, but to build. The foundation gala happened in November, 3 weeks after Dorothy Celeste arrived. Celeste did not attend because she was 3 weeks postpartum, and her doctor had made a face at the idea, but she had co-chaired the planning committee, and she had done the work that made it possible. And she had sent Candace Whitfield in her place, with instructions and with the donation that she had been making to the gala's supported organizations for years quietly, from her own accounts under her own name. The gala raised its full target. The supported organizations received their funding. The work continued. 3 months later, in the sunroom of the house on Oak Hill Road, Celeste was sitting with Dorothy Celeste on her shoulder, and a cup of coffee in her hand, and the afternoon light doing exactly what she had imagined it would do when she designed this room. And Sterling was somewhere upstairs doing homework, and the house smelled like the stew she had put in the slow cooker that morning, and like cedar, and like Dorothy Celeste's particular baby smell, which was the best smell Celeste had encountered in 34 years of living. She was not the same woman who had found the envelope on the kitchen island on that October morning. She was Celeste Simms. She had always been Celeste Simms. Even in the years when she had let the hyphen crowd the first name, even in the years when she had code-switched and made herself easier and stood beside him in green dresses at galas and defended him to her grandmother and vouched for him in rooms where he was doubted, she had always been, underneath all of it, Celeste Simms. She had just needed the space to come back to herself. She had just needed the quiet to hear what she had always known. She pressed her lips to Dorothy Celeste's head. The baby made a small sound, the sound of sleep adjusting itself. "I know," Celeste said. "I've got you. I'm right here." The afternoon light moved across the sunroom floor. The slow cooker hummed in the kitchen. Somewhere upstairs, Sterling was listening to music she could hear at the edge of audibility. The bass line of something she did not know, but that was clearly good because he played the things he loved at exactly this volume when he was happy. She sat in the house that was hers and she breathed. This was what she had built. This was what she had protected. Not the board meeting, not the shares, not the legal documents in Camille's files. This. The afternoon and the stew and the baby on her shoulder and her son's music upstairs, and the light doing exactly what she had imagined it would do. This was the thing that could not be liquidated. This was the thing that had never been on any balance sheet. This was hers. February in Birmingham is the month that does not apologize for itself. It is cold the way the city is cold in winter, which is to say more seriously than people who have never been here sometimes expect. A cold with weight to it, the kind that requires a coat and means it. But it is also the month that carries possibility inside the cold, the particular quality of a morning that is still winter and already not quite winter, that is still dark at 6 and already lighter than it was a week ago, that holds spring in the distance the way you hold something you are not ready to look at directly, but you know is there. She was on the front porch of the house on Oak Hill Road at 6:15 in the morning. She had been awake since 5:30, when Dorothy Celeste had decided that 5:30 was the appropriate time to announce her opinions about the night having gone on long enough. Celeste had fed her and rocked her and put her back down in the east-facing nursery with the specific efficiency of a woman who has learned in 3 months to move through the quiet parts of caregiving with the full knowledge that sleep is a negotiation and not a given. Dorothy Celeste had gone back down. Celeste had not. She had made coffee instead. Real coffee her grandmother's way, not the decaf that had governed her life for 8 months, and which she had not missed once since her doctor released her from the obligation. She had put on her coat, her good winter coat, the one she had bought for herself in January from an account that was entirely her own, and she had taken her coffee and gone out to the front porch. She was not cold. She was sitting in the cold and she was not cold. That was something. The neighborhood was waking up in the way that neighborhoods wake up before the day has gotten going, in pieces and quietly. A light in the house across the street, the sound of someone's car starting 2 blocks over, a bird, one bird that had arrived too early for the season and did not seem concerned about it, beginning what it came here to begin. A dog being walked past the house, the particular click of paw on pavement that meant someone was taking care of something that needed taking care of. She sipped her coffee. She thought about the year. She thought about October and the envelope on the kitchen island. She thought about standing in the kitchen in the 6:45 morning with her hands going cold around the papers and the prenatal vitamins and the wooden bowl that had been her grandmother's. She thought about calling her sister. One word. Hey, and Vivian hearing everything in it. She thought about Camille's office and the folder she had placed on the desk. She thought about the way Camille had read it, carefully, turning pages, and had looked up with something in her face that Celeste had not seen before and had recognized as the thing that is adjacent to awe. She thought about driving past the apartment on 7th Street, the fire escape where she had grown tomatoes the first summer, the view of the church steeple if you knew where to look. She thought about her mother sitting outside the house on Crescent Street for 22 minutes before she could go in, about her grandmother's kitchen on Elm Hill, about biscuits made from memory, measuring nothing, getting them right, about Grandma Dot saying, "Baby, I did not raise you to be anybody's decoration. Get up." She thought about the hospital room at 2 in the morning, the monitors, the specific loneliness of that room and the call to her grandmother, and the 40 minutes of her grandmother talking about nothing and everything while Celeste held the phone and breathed. She thought about the board meeting, the hiss of the laundry machines below, the photograph of the 3rd Avenue storefront in 1978, Marcus's face when he saw her, the recognition in it. Bernard Tate saying, "I vote with the majority shareholder." Eugenia's hands on her face in the kitchen on Chestnut Avenue. Go be that. She thought about the 1 Corinthians parking lot. 7 women. October sun. The specific weight of belonging. She thought about Dorothy Celeste in the bassinet. Perfect and new and entirely known. She thought about what her mother had told her once, when she was 17 and heartbroken over something she could no longer name. "You are not who you are in the easy times," Lorraine Simms had said. "You are who you are when the easy times stop. Pay attention to who you are when it is hard." She had paid attention. She knew who she was. She was Dorothy Mae Simms's granddaughter. She was Lorraine Simms's daughter. She was Vivian's sister and Sterling's mother and Rashida's mother and Dorothy Celeste's mother. She was the majority shareholder of a company that had been built from nothing by people who loved it, and she was protecting it the way it deserved to be protected. She was the woman who was going to sit across a table in January with a woman who made natural beauty products in a garage and had a 6-month waiting list, and she was going to say, "I see what you are building. Let me help you build it right." She was Celeste Simms. She had always been Celeste Simms. The real wealth was never his to begin with. The real wealth was never on any balance sheet he controlled. The real wealth was everything she carried in her body, everything she learned in 34 years, everything her grandmother pressed into her hands with those biscuits and those conversations on the Elm Hill porch, the knowledge in her hands, the precision in her thinking, the love she had for her children, which was not diminished by what their father had done and would not be diminished by anything, the women who formed circles in parking lots, the grandmother who called you at 2 in the morning and talked about nothing until you could breathe again. That was the wealth, and what she healed in herself she did not pass down. Dorothy Celeste would not inherit her mother's habit of making herself smaller so someone else could feel large. Sterling would not inherit the silence of a woman who had stayed past the point of staying. Rashida already knew, already understood, already carried herself with the specific authority of a young woman who had watched the woman she called mother survive something gracefully and had filed that knowledge away in the part of herself that would use it for the rest of her life. This is what I leave them, she thought. Not the company, though I leave them that too. Not the house, though I leave them this too. The knowledge that you can be hurt without being broken. The understanding that grief and strength live in the same body and one does not cancel the other. The certainty that they come from women who stood up. That is the inheritance. That is the real thing. The sky was doing what February skies do when the night is ending. First, the specific softening of the dark, not yet light, not quite dark, the in-between that lasts only a few minutes and is always worth watching if you are awake to see it. Then a line of color at the eastern edge, not dramatic, not orange and gold the way summer sunrises sometimes are, but a quiet gray-blue that was turning slowly into something warmer. The bird was still singing. The coffee was still warm. She heard the front door open behind her. A moment later, Sterling appeared in the doorway in his oversized sweatshirt and his socks, his hair still from sleeping, his eyes carrying the particular quality of a 16-year-old who has woken up voluntarily at 6:15 in the morning and is not entirely sure what has come over him. He looked at her sitting on the porch in the cold. He looked at the sky. "You're up early," he said. "So are you," she said. He came out and sat in the second chair. He did not have coffee because he was 16, and she had not yet started that negotiation. He pulled his sweatshirt sleeves over his hands. He looked at the sky with her. They sat quietly for a while. The February morning moved around them. The bird kept singing. "Mom," Sterling said. She said, "You doing okay?" She thought about the answer. She thought about what doing okay meant, about the full weight of the question and what it deserved. "I'm doing better than okay," she said. "I'm doing exactly where I need to be." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm glad we're here." "Me too, baby," she said. "Me too." She pressed her hand to his arm briefly, the way you touch someone when words are accurate but insufficient. He leaned slightly toward her, just slightly, in the way of a teenage boy who will not admit he is leaning. She did not point it out. They watched the sky lighten. The bird was still going. The neighbor's sprinklers started their morning run, which was either very optimistic for February or simply programmed on a schedule that did not account for seasons. The light was finding the edges of things now, finding the bare branches of the trees at the end of the driveway, finding the fence at the edge of the yard, finding the frost on the grass that said the night had been cold and the morning was going to be worth having. She thought about what came next. The January conversation with the woman with the waiting list. The second month of working with Imani Washington on the Tuscaloosa University contract, which was close, which was going to close. The February board meeting of Okafor Family Enterprises, the first one with her fully in the chair, the first one where the agenda was hers to set. Rashida's visit at the end of the month. Dorothy Celeste's 4-month checkup. Sterling's college visit to Morehouse College in Atlanta, which he had told her about 2 weeks ago, with the particular casualness of a boy who is trying not to be too excited about something that matters enormously to him. All of it. All the forward-moving, ordinary, extraordinary specific things of a life that is being built by someone who knows what she is building and why. She thought about her grandmother saying, "Baby, there are always windows. When a door closes in your face, check the windows. There are always windows. There are always windows." She had checked every one of them, and she had found her way through. Dorothy Celeste made a sound from inside the house. Not the urgent sound, not the feed me now sound. The just waking sound. The I am here and you should know it sound. Celeste stood. She stood carefully, with the care of a woman who is 3 months postpartum and whose body is still in the process of becoming what it is going to be next, which was a body she had not yet fully met but was looking forward to knowing. She picked up her coffee. She pressed her free hand to Sterling's shoulder as she passed him. "Keep watching it," she said. "The light's about to be good." "Okay," he said. She went inside. She went up the stairs to the east-facing nursery. Dorothy Celeste was awake in her bassinet, her dark hair catching the first light from the window, her eyes moving with the unfocused intensity of a baby, who is taking in everything and filing it all away for later. Celeste picked her up. She settled her daughter against her shoulder, that familiar weight, that particular warmth. "Good morning," she said. "You are right on time." Dorothy Celeste made a sound. The sound of a beginning. The sound of someone who has arrived in something and knows it. Outside, the February morning had arrived fully. The sky over Birmingham was the particular clear color of a cold morning after the dark has finished. The specific blue that belongs to early light and belongs to no other time of day. The bird was still singing. Sterling was still on the porch. Celeste stood in the east-facing nursery with her daughter, and she looked out the window at the morning. She thought, "I did not start from scratch. I started from experience. I started from everything that was already in me, everything I learned from the women who built me, everything I carried through 14 years and brought out the other side. I started from what could not be taken, and from there I built." She thought, "Everything that comes next is mine to make." She thought, "Whatever comes next, I am more than ready." The morning light fell through the east-facing window exactly as she had imagined it would. The day she first stood in this room, in this house that was always hers, and decided to be ready. She lifted her face to it, she breathed, and she began.